Hello, and welcome back to Dreamland Encounters. Before we start today's story, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Get comfy, settle in, and let's dive into an incredible experience. Flying had been my life for over a decade, mostly charter and sightseeing trips. That particular afternoon seemed completely ordinary. A short flight from Billings to a private airstrip near Sheridan. The winter sky was cold and clear, with a thin layer of high clouds. Sunlight had that washed-out, silvery quality that comes when winter light struggles to break through. About 30 minutes from landing, something caught my eye. Initially, I thought it was just an unusual cloud formation catching sunlight. But it moved differently. A metallic disc dropped vertically from the cloud layer, perfectly straight, no wobbling. It stopped mid-air for 2 seconds, then shot horizontally and vanished into the mountain haze. No sound, no trail, nothing. My first instinct was to rationalize it as another aircraft, but something felt off. No wings, too smooth, too precise. I checked my instruments, expecting some disruption, but everything remained normal. I landed without any issues and taxied toward the hangar. That's when I noticed them. 2 men standing in the building's shadow. Black suits, white shirts, dark ties, no coats. Despite the freezing 25-degree temperature, one tall and lean, the other shorter and broader. Both looked pale, as if they hadn't seen sunlight in months. They didn't approach immediately, just watched as I shut down the engine and climbed out. Then the taller one stepped forward. "Mr. Thea." "Harlan?" he said in a flat, almost robotic tone. The shorter man held a clipboard with papers. "We understand you observed an aerial anomaly during your approach," he stated. I was stunned. I hadn't reported anything, hadn't even processed what I'd seen. "I saw something," I admitted, not sure what. The tall man responded, "That's exactly why we're here." The airstrip felt deserted. No fuel truck driver, no usual arrivals handler, just silence and wind rattling the hangar doors. 2 men approached me with a clipboard, their presence oddly uniform and controlled. The shorter one was close, unnervingly so, with eyes that seemed too grey, too perfect. They wanted me to sign a form about atmospheric interference. The paper was dense with text, but a few words jumped out. "No threat to flight safety." I hesitated. "Who are you with?" I asked. "Federal jurisdiction," came the vague reply. When I pressed for specificity, he just repeated the same cryptic phrase. I had seen a metallic object, but the shorter man quickly corrected me. "The object you saw was not metallic. It was atmospheric interference." His tone wasn't aggressive, but something beneath it suggested I should already understand and agree. My eyes darted to the terminal building. Dark windows, no movement. I realized I hadn't heard another engine or voice since landing. The taller man extended the clipboard again. "Please sign, Mr. Harland." Something in me just wanted to escape this strange encounter. I signed without reading, and instantly the shorter man tucked the form away. They stepped back in perfect synchronization, as if our conversation was definitively closed. No goodbye, no handshake, just a slight nod from the taller man before they walked into the hangar's shadowed interior. When I followed moments later, the space was completely empty. No doors, no exit, nowhere they could have vanished. A distant plane engine started, breaking the eerie silence. The night was cold and clear, the kind where sound travels and stars shine bright. I was out on the porch with my tea, a nightly ritual that helps me unwind. Leaning on the railing, I gazed up at the sky. One star caught my attention. It wasn't behaving like the others. At first, I thought it might be a plane, but its movement was odd. Drifting, stopping, then jerking to the side. Something about its motion felt deliberate. I watched for a full minute, my curiosity growing. Then it did something strange. The star traced a perfect arc around another star before stopping abruptly, as if checking its position. I chuckled, thinking I must be tired. But then the star began to glow brighter, subtly, intensifying. When I turned to set down my mug, I looked back to find it completely vanished. The next morning, I was working my usual early shift at the local cafe. It's a small town spot where everyone knows each other and strangers are rare. Around 8 o'clock, while wiping down tables, the bell above the door rang. 2 men entered, dressed identically in black suits, not just dark, but the kind of crisp, funeral-perfect black. Black fedoras topped their heads. No coats, despite the freezing temperature. They walked directly to a booth and sat down, keeping their hats on and avoiding eye contact. Later, at the airfield, everything seemed normal. My ground crew approached, asking about fuel. When I mentioned the 2 men from earlier, he looked confused, saying no one had been around all day. I didn't argue. After fueling up, I discovered my flight log was missing. The pen remained clipped to the side, but the notepad had vanished. Those men were never seen again. At first, they didn't want menus. One of them gave a barely perceptible headshake, sitting in complete silence. I assumed they were waiting for someone and went back to my routine, refilling the coffee pot behind the counter. But something felt off. They weren't talking or moving, just sitting perfectly still, facing forward. Whenever I moved around the cafe, I could sense one of them subtly turning his head, tracking my movements. It wasn't an obvious stare, but something that made my skin crawl. Locals came and went, quickly averting their eyes from the booth, seemingly wanting to avoid any interaction. When Chelsea arrived to take over the morning shift, she gave me a questioning look. I just shrugged, unable to explain the strange atmosphere. As I was preparing my coffee to go, something unsettling happened. The man on the inside of the booth leaned slightly toward his companion, not whispering, but listening. The other barely moved his lips, speaking without sound. The cafe hummed with normal background noise, but something felt different. A pressure in my ears, like standing too close to a powerful speaker. When I turned back after putting a lid on my coffee, they were both staring directly at me. No expression, no blinking, just watching. I left quickly. Outside, their black SUV was parked right in front, its windows so dark I couldn't see inside. I hadn't heard it arrive earlier. Walking to my truck, I tried not to look, but caught movement in my peripheral vision. Both men now stood in the cafe doorway, perfectly synchronized, staring straight at me. I started my truck and pulled out, checking the rearview mirror. They stepped onto They didn't immediately follow, but when I reached the first stop sign and looked back, their SUV was rolling out of the lot. Nights at Clear Falls State Park were quiet in early October, after the summer crowds had died down. My night shift mostly involved checking locked gates, patrolling the campground, and sitting in the truck with the radio on low. Around 9:40 p.m., the ranger station phone rang. Darren from the bait shop called, saying 2 fishermen had just reported strange lights over the lake about half an hour earlier. One described a lantern drifting underwater at an impossible speed, while the other saw a spotlight beaming straight up from beneath the surface. Suspecting poachers, Darren thought I should investigate. I grabbed the truck keys and a flashlight, heading out to the lake about 10 minutes away. The night was calm, with just a slight breeze and a barely visible moon. Wet leaves scented the air. Near the North Shore Lots turnoff, I spotted a black sedan parked inside the access road, angled with headlights pointing toward the trees. No plates were visible. As I slowed down, thinking maybe a lost visitor was nearby, I saw 2 men standing motionless on the path leading to the water. They were dressed in dark, pressed suits with wide-brimmed hats that obscured their faces. No fishing gear, no cameras, just standing perfectly still, facing the lake. Something felt off. In the weeks that followed, I kept catching glimpses of an SUV on side streets or in the grocery store parking lot, always just far enough away that I couldn't be certain. They never returned to the cafe, but late at night I'd get this strange feeling. The low-pressure hum just beneath the quiet tingling in my ears. I stayed a couple cars back during their initial approach, never speeding, never getting too close. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, but they followed me to the edge of town. When I turned onto the county road, they went straight. That night, I went out on the porch, half expecting to see that star moving around like before. The sky was clear, identical to the previous night, but the spot where I'd first seen it was now empty. I pulled up and got out of my truck, my boots crunching on the gravel as I approached the 2 men. They turned simultaneously, their movements so perfectly synchronized it seemed rehearsed. One stepped forward, his voice deep and completely devoid of emotion. "You'll need to return to the station," he said flatly. I identified myself as the on-duty ranger, explaining I was responding to reports of lights on the lake. His response was immediate and unchanging. "This location is under federal jurisdiction tonight." When I asked for identification, the second man quickly showed something that looked like an ID wallet. I caught a glimpse of a seal, maybe an eagle, but it vanished before I could confirm. "We don't usually have federal officers here without notice," I said. "Notice has been given," came the reply. When I asked who was notified, he simply stared, not with anger or impatience, but with an unsettling stillness that made the surrounding silence grow heavy. The wind moved branches overhead, adding to the strange atmosphere. Something felt fundamentally wrong, not threatening exactly, but like I'd accidentally walked into a private moment where everyone knew something I didn't. The men continued watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I glanced toward the lake and noticed an unusual light rippling about 100 yards out. It wasn't from the moon or a boat. It seemed to be emerging from beneath the water's surface. When I looked back, both men were staring, waiting to see my next move. Suddenly, I wanted to leave. Not out of fear, but because I felt I wasn't meant to witness whatever was happening. "All right," I said, and walked back to my truck. They didn't follow or move. As I drove away, the black sedan remained parked, engine off, no lights on. Back at the station, I sat at my desk, staring at the phone for a long time. I didn't call anyone. I'd been pulling long nights in the meteorology lab at school, a senior majoring in atmospheric science. My advisor had given me permission to use archive satellite imagery for my thesis. Most of the work was boring, jet streams, cloud formations, occasional hurricanes spiraling out in the Pacific, but I liked the quiet after dark, getting into a rhythm without interruptions. One Tuesday night, while going through infrared images from a NOAA satellite feed, I noticed something odd around 2 a.m. The images were time-stamped and geotagged as usual. A series of frames over the Midwest showed a perfect circular heat signature in the middle of otherwise normal cloud cover. It wasn't huge, maybe a couple miles across, but it definitely stood out. The strange part was how it didn't move with the clouds. Frame after frame, it just hovered there. Then, between two captures maybe 30 seconds apart, it vanished. No dispersal, no drift, just gone. I flagged the files and continued working. The next set was from a week earlier in a different region entirely, somewhere over the coast of Maine. Same phenomenon. Perfect circle. Completely stationary, disappeared in under a minute. Earlier, I'd been at the lake. Around midnight, I decided to swing back, figuring whatever was there might be gone. When I arrived, the sedan had disappeared, and the shoreline was empty. No light on the water, no footprints on the gravel. The air felt colder, though that could have just been a temperature drop. The next morning, I asked other rangers if anyone had heard about federal officers visiting the park. Nobody had. I checked the incident logs, nothing. Later that afternoon, I stopped by Darren's bait shop and asked about those lights. He gave me a strange look and said he didn't know what I was talking about. When I reminded him about his previous call, he just shook his head and claimed he must have been thinking of someone else. I didn't push it. That night, driving home, I slowed down at the North Shore turnoff. It was empty. No sedan, no figures. Just dark trees and cricket sounds. But I kept driving without stopping. I first noticed something unusual when I found an odd thermal signature in the satellite images. It wasn't just one instance. Over several nights, I discovered multiple examples stretching back 2 years. The pattern was consistent. Perfectly round shapes, motionless, vanishing in less than a minute. I started cautiously, thinking it might be a technical glitch. The first image was over southern Nevada, just 3 days old. Switching between thermal and visible light layers, I saw nothing in the normal view, but the thermal image was crystal clear. Instead of raising alarms immediately, I decided to investigate quietly. I began pulling data from various sources, European satellites, old tracking systems. By Thursday night, I had compiled nearly 30 examples. Each image told the same strange story. Something was there, then suddenly wasn't. It felt like I'd uncovered something overlooked by everyone else. Early the next morning, a sticky note on my monitor from Dr. Larkin, my advisor, read simply, "See me." His phone call was terse, his tone clipped. Minutes later, 2 men arrived. They weren't typical university visitors. Dressed in impeccably tailored black suits, crisp white shirts, and shoes polished to a shine, they looked completely out of place. One was tall, pale, with sharp features. The other was shorter, broader, with darker skin. The tall one spoke my name like an interrogation, demanding to see my workstation. They didn't ask. They simply walked in, sat down, and began examining my files. No introductions, no identification, just a cold, mechanical efficiency that made me instantly uneasy. 2 men entered my workspace unexpectedly. They were tall and short, moving with purpose. The tall one went straight to my computer, opened a file, and quickly dragged it to the recycle bin. He did the same for the next file, and the next. When I started to speak, he cut me off without even looking my way. His tone wasn't exactly a threat, but it definitely wasn't a request either. Within minutes, every single file vanished. The shorter man emptied the recycle bin and then cleared the system log and cloud backup. My backups were no longer even under my account. They'd already logged in through another access point. After finishing, they both stared at me. "You will not attempt to recover these, do you understand?" The tall one demanded. My mouth was dry, and I just nodded when he repeated the question. They left without another word. I followed them to the hallway, watching as they turned down the side corridor leading to the old geology wing, a space under renovation for months. By the time I rounded the corner, they had disappeared completely. No sound of doors, no trace. Back at my desk, I checked my USB drive. Gone. Every backup, even my separate notes, deleted, as if they'd never existed. Dr. Larkin arrived about 20 minutes later, casually assigning me a new data set for my thesis and walking away before I could respond. That night, I worked late in the lab, keeping the lights low and focusing solely on the new data. Around 1 a.m., I went to the vending machine. Upon returning, a folded piece of paper sat on my keyboard. I hadn't heard anyone enter. It simply read, "The hallway was empty. The building hummed quietly with only the air vents breaking the silence." I packed up and left. For the rest of the semester, I never saw them again. I stopped examining those satellite frames and stopped discussing my findings. But occasionally, walking across campus late at night, I'd spot a black sedan parked nearby. It was mid-November, with that sharp, clear morning where frost lingers even after sunrise. Out near the old logging road past Dry Creek, I was walking with my rifle. Hunting was more of an excuse to be alone in this place. The forest here stays silent, broken only by the occasional crow call. Snowmobile tracks had long since disappeared, and I'd veered off the main path toward a familiar clearing surrounded by tall spruce trees. My boots crunched through the frosty ground as I searched for deer tracks. Something about the light caught my attention. At first I thought it was a heat shimmer, but my breath was visible in the cold air. Then I saw it. The air in the clearing's center seemed bent, like looking through warped glass or the distorted bottom of a river. Suspended about 20 feet up was an elongated oval shape. Its surface looked like liquid metal, perfectly reflecting the surrounding trees, so seamlessly camouflaged that I might have missed it entirely if it hadn't been subtly moving. No spinning, no swaying, just hovering silently. I stood motionless, listening. Complete silence enveloped me. No wind rustled the branches, no birds chirped, not even the distant highway hum you'd normally hear. The stillness was absolute. I'm not sure how long I watched. Maybe a minute, maybe longer. When I shifted my weight, everything changed. The surface rippled like a stone dropped in a pond, tilting slightly toward me. Something in that moment made my stomach drop. It felt like the object was aware of my presence. Keeping my eyes locked on it, I backed toward the tree line. My heart thundered in my ears. I decided to circle back to the logging road and head directly to my truck. Halfway back, the forest silence transformed. It wasn't just quiet anymore. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. I gripped my rifle tightly, my senses on high alert. I was working the night shift at a distribution warehouse on the edge of town, massive place with 15 loading bays, a small office block, and nearly 3 acres of fenced-in lot. Just after 2 a.m, something caught my eye on the cameras. The woods had been strange that day. I was out hunting, rifle held, with my finger just outside the trigger guard, when I rounded a bend in the trail and saw 2 men standing side by side, blocking my path. Their appearance was odd. Black suits, long coats and hats that seemed completely out of place among the trees. What struck me most was how immaculate they looked. Not a speck of frost or mud, despite the trail's muddy patches. They didn't look at my rifle, or even directly at me. Their gaze seemed to pass through me, as if I were transparent. One stepped forward, revealing polished black leather shoes that were impossibly clean. "You've gone off limits," he said in a flat, rhythmic voice that defied any recognizable accent. My mouth went dry. I considered pushing through the trees, but something about their stance made me hesitate. The second man spoke. "Turn around. Use another route." I tried to play dumb, claiming I was just out deer hunting and unaware of any boundaries. They didn't react, not even a blink. When I didn't immediately move, they stepped forward in unison, their movement precise, almost choreographed. That was enough. I muttered agreement and backed away, turning to walk, not run quickly through thicker trees until I reached the main road. I expected to hear footsteps following me, but there was only silence. Back at my truck, I noticed a thin layer of frost on the windshield, though it had been clear that morning. My phone, which I'd used earlier, was completely dead. I assumed the cold had drained the battery, but when I plugged it in at home, it powered on normally, still showing 62% charge. I thought about returning to check the clearing, but a weather report predicted heavy snow in the area for the rest of the week. I never went back, and now I don't hunt alone anymore. The encounter left me unsettled, a feeling that lingered long after that strange morning in the woods. The job was simple: watch monitors, log truck arrivals, and do occasional walk-arounds. Most nights were dead quiet. This night was different. The weather was clear and cold, with wind occasionally gusting but not triggering the motion sensors. Halfway through a stale coffee, I glanced at camera 12, which covered the far corner of the southern yard. Only dim perimeter lights illuminated the area. Something caught my eye. At first, I thought the image was glitching, but leaning closer, I saw a shape unlike any truck or familiar object, sitting low behind the far fence line near the trees. It didn't cast shadows normally. Instead, it emitted a soft, pulsing, whitish glow. I squinted, wondering if it was a weird lamp or lens reflection, but no, it was solid and motionless. Checking other cameras confirmed my suspicion. Cameras 13 and 14 were blocked by storage containers, but camera 12 captured the object clearly. I wanted to grab my phone and photograph the monitor, but something kept me frozen. For about 30 seconds, I watched. Then the glow subtly shifted, as if tilting or rotating, yet absolutely no sound accompanied the movement. Any truck or machinery would have made noise, even from a distance. Then, faster than a blink, the thing vanished. Not fading, not moving, just gone. Still staring at the empty yard, I noticed the front gate camera's motion feed activate. An unmarked, dark van pulled up outside the security office. Unusual, at 2 a.m. two men emerged, wearing identical black suits, white shirts, and black ties. They didn't look like typical truck drivers or inspectors. The taller man had a narrow face and skin so pale it appeared grey under the security lights. The shorter one kept his head down, studying the ground. Neither smiled. When I buzzed the intercom and asked if I could help them, the tall man looked directly at the camera and spoke in a flat, emotionless voice. "We need access to the southern loading bay." Those words stopped me cold. The southern loading bay is an abandoned section hidden from public maps, tucked away behind newer expansions. Normally it stays locked up with no scheduled deliveries. I wasn't even sure management or security discussed this area openly. Two men appeared suddenly, standing completely motionless. The shorter one and his taller companion seemed unnaturally still. When they requested access to the southern loading bay, something felt off. I hesitated before asking who they represented. Time-sensitive matter, the shorter man said, his gaze fixed and unreadable. My instincts screamed not to let them in. Their presence was unsettling. No nervous movements, no wandering eyes. Just an eerie, unwavering stillness. The taller one claimed they'd already spoken to my supervisor, which I knew was impossible. Dennis, our on-call supervisor, lived 2 towns away and would have informed me about any visitors. Something about the shorter man's eyes disturbed me deeply. Under the security lights, they appeared flat and dark, almost unnatural. When I said I couldn't grant access without clearance and reached for the phone, they simply turned and walked back to their van. No argument, no resistance, just a smooth, silent retreat. The van rolled away without headlights, disappearing into darkness. I switched to road cameras, but they never appeared on any footage. The yard remained empty and silent. Every building creak made me jump for the rest of my shift. When Dennis arrived at 6 to take over, I shared the strange encounter. He looked at me like I was joking. No calls were logged, no visitors recorded. We checked the gate camera feed, and something was wrong. The recording for that time slot had vanished, a corrupted file, according to the system. Every other camera worked fine except camera 12, which went black for 4 minutes after I first saw a strange glow. I kept quiet afterward, but now, during night shifts, I can't help glancing toward that far corner, half expecting to see that pale, pulsing light emerging from the darkness. The chill of early winter was sharp, my breath forming white clouds as I worked high up in the bucket. About 20 feet above the ground, I was replacing a cracked insulator on a rural power line. The job site stretched out between empty fields, with just a thin dirt road cutting through the landscape. Back in the truck, Dale was handling paperwork, the sound of rustling inspection logs barely audible. Wind whispered through the overhead wires, but then something changed. A low, steady hum began, not loud, but persistent. It reminded me of a distant refrigerator, except there was nothing around that could make such a sound. When I turned, I saw it hanging motionless over the eastern fields. Not very high up, maybe a couple 100 feet. The object was oval-shaped and dark against the pale sky. A strange shimmer surrounded it, like heat rising from summer asphalt. No wings, no blades, no engine noise, just that vibrating hum. As I reached for my radio, the sound instantly cut out. Dead silence. The object tilted slightly, then shot straight up, vanishing into the cloud cover. I stared at the empty sky for several seconds before hearing gravel crunch below. A sleek black SUV without front plates rolled to a stop right beneath my lift. Two men emerged, identical in their black suits, white shirts, and black ties. They could have been brothers. One shaded his eyes and gestured for me to come down. Something about their presence felt off. No hard hats, no utility logos. These weren't typical line workers. The second man spoke, his voice flat and emotionless. "Sir, we need you to come down." It wasn't a request. As I lowered the bucket, the first man stepped. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Up close, his skin was pale, almost grey, with features that seemed impossibly smooth, almost unreal. I was out working with Dale when it happened. We were at the job site, and the day was cold wind cutting across empty fields. Suddenly, two men approached me, their appearance odd from the start. Neither wore a coat despite the 30-degree temperature, and the first man's face seemed unusual, almost textureless. "Everything working all right?" he asked, his voice calm but with a subtle tension. I nodded, trying to appear normal while fixing an insulator. Dale remained in the truck's cab, watching. When I glanced his way, the second man subtly shifted to block my view. "If you saw something in the sky, it's important you tell us for your own safety," the first man said. I claimed I didn't understand what they meant. They exchanged a look, then told me not to discuss this with anyone. It would be best for everyone. Before I could respond, they returned to their SUV. "We appreciate your cooperation," one said, making it clear the conversation was over. They drove away smoothly without kicking up dust until they vanished from sight. When I climbed into the truck, I asked Dale about the strange encounter. To my shock, he insisted he hadn't seen anyone. He'd heard a vehicle arrive, but claimed the road was empty when he looked. We finished our work in complete silence. That night, I considered calling my boss, or the sheriff, but couldn't articulate what had happened. Two mysterious men had warned me about something I hadn't even fully witnessed. It wasn't until later I remembered the drive with Julie. We were returning from her sister's place, traveling down Route 19, on a clear, cold night. The stars looked sharp, and moonlight cast shadows across the road. As Julie drove, something passed across the moon, solid and perfectly circular. Every time I close my eyes now, I see that dark shape hovering over the fields, hearing a persistent, unsettling hum. Julie slowed the car, almost to a stop at the bottom of the driveway. A black Lincoln, shiny but not new, was parked just outside the entrance. A man in a black suit, white shirt, and black tie stood leaning against it. No coat. Despite his breath visible in the cold air, he wasn't looking at us initially, just staring toward the tree line across the street. When he turned his head toward us, his movements were precise, like an actor hitting a mark perfectly. His face was pale and thin, with no facial hair or glasses. His eyes seemed dark, not just in color, but dark in a way that seemed to absorb all light. Something had moved earlier, slow enough that I actually saw it block the moonlight before disappearing. Julie had seen it too. Her hands had tightened on the steering wheel, though she hadn't said anything. The road felt emptier than usual, even for a night drive. By the time we reached our street, I'd almost convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe a plane catching the light strangely, or a bird closer than I'd thought. But now, this man's presence changed everything. He stepped toward Julie's window, not quickly, but with a certainty that suggested we weren't going to drive away. "You enjoy the show tonight?" he asked. His voice was low and even, completely at odds with his blank expression. Julie hesitated. "What show?" she finally asked. His mouth twitched into something barely resembling a smile. "The one you just saw," he said, as if correcting her, implying she'd already admitted something. My stomach dropped. I wanted to ask what he meant, but my throat went dry. Julie remained silent, putting the car in park. Suddenly, I realized the absolute stillness around us. No crickets, no wind, just an eerie background silence. For the first time, the man looked directly at me. His gaze locked onto me, unmoving and intense. I was driving back from my cousin Matt's place in Belelford, taking County Road 16 instead of the main highway. Late, just after 11 o'clock, I liked this road at night, quiet, with no streetlights, just a long, dark stretch punctuated by occasional mailboxes. Cold but clear, I had the heat on low and the window cracked. Wood smoke from someone's stove drifted in. My mind wandered lazily, soft music playing and a vague thought about an early morning ahead. 8 or 9 miles past town, something caught my eye. In the field to the left, a perfectly straight column of white light erupted from the ground, shooting into the sky. This wasn't like a searchlight or flashlight beam. It was narrow, solid, and impossibly bright. Brighter than anything I'd ever seen. For maybe 3 seconds it stood stark against the darkness, then snapped off completely. No afterglow, no smoke, no sound. I slowed, staring through the driver's side window. Pulling over just past a gravel driveway, I killed the headlights, half expecting the light to reappear. The field lay black now, with only a faint tree line visible in the distance. Something felt wrong. That part of the county was just farmland and old barns, empty at this hour. I hesitated about pulling into the driveway for a closer look, feeling like I'd stumbled onto something I shouldn't see. Instead, I kept going, my speed dropping to around 35, constantly checking the mirrors. I confirmed the road behind me remained empty. The next morning, I went out early to get the paper. 2 sets of tire tracks marked the shoulder where the car had been parked, but no footprints disturbed the frost, not even our own from the night before. Julie pulled up the driveway fast. After parking in the garage, we sat in silence for a minute, both scanning the mirrors. The street was empty. A shadowy figure had approached the car earlier, asked if we had any questions. When we didn't respond, he stepped back to a black Lincoln, sliding into the driver's seat with practiced precision, never breaking his gaze from us. I was driving along County Road 16 when something caught my eye. Just past a small rise, a black sedan was parked sideways across both lanes. Its tail lights were low and wide like an older model. As I approached, the car remained completely still. The scene felt off from the start. 2 men stood motionless near the headlights, both wearing dark suits and white shirts. Their positioning was unnervingly precise, one by each headlight. When they turned to look directly at me, a chill ran down my spine. The man on the left began making a slow, deliberate turning motion with his hand. His movement wasn't urgent, just methodical. The other man didn't move at all. I rolled down my window and called out, "Is everything all right?" My voice seemed too loud in the cold air. No response came. Something didn't feel right. No flashing lights, no debris, no indication of an accident. Just 2 silent men standing symmetrically, their gaze fixed on me. My instincts screamed that this wasn't a normal traffic situation. It felt staged, calculated. I shifted into reverse and backed up slowly, finding a side road about 100 feet back. In my rearview mirror, the men remained in their exact positions, unmoving. The side road wound through farmland, eventually reconnecting with County Road 16 about 4 miles ahead. When I returned to the original spot, nothing was there. No car, no men, just empty pavement under my headlights. I drove faster, my hands gripping the wheel tightly, until I finally saw another vehicle at the county line. At home, I sat in the driveway for a long time, engine running. Who would I even call? What would I say? That I'd seen 2 silent men in suits blocking the road after a strange light in a field. The next day, I drove the same route in daylight. The field where I'd seen the light was just bare dirt and weeds. No tracks, no equipment, no sign anything had happened. The evening was getting darker as I hiked down the fire road, the trail winding narrowly along the slope. My boots crunched against the gravel, each step loud in the stillness. Earlier, while descending, I caught a strange glimpse through the trees, a quick, silver flash that disappeared almost instantly. Not sunlight, but something reflective that vanished between the branches. About halfway down, a black SUV appeared behind me. It was unusual for vehicles to be on this trail, which was typically gated off except for ranger trucks. This wasn't a ranger truck. It was a spotless, shiny SUV with extremely dark tinted windows. The vehicle moved slowly, maintaining a consistent distance of about 40 or 50 feet behind me. When I stepped aside to let it pass, the SUV slowed even more but didn't move around me. With no phone service, I felt increasingly uneasy. The driver's side window rolled down halfway, revealing 2 men who looked completely out of place. They wore crisp black suits, white shirts, and black ties, not typical hiking attire, especially on a dusty fire road at dusk. Earlier that day, I'd noticed something odd. A black sedan had been parked at the end of my street, with no front license plate and windows too dark to see through. When I went back outside just minutes later, the car had vanished without a trace. The trail was quiet, except for my footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. I was on air until just past midnight, wrapping up my usual late-night talk show about local mysteries and weird news. The station was quiet, the hum of the equipment, and the air conditioner the only background. A call came through around 12:17 a.m. The voice on the line was calm, almost monotone, but there was this unmistakable tension underneath, like the caller was trying not to be overheard. "Hello," I said. "You're on the air." "Yeah," the guy said. "I need to describe something I saw. I don't know who else to tell." The SUV rolled beside me, matching my walking pace down the trail. Two men inside, completely silent except for a brief strange conversation. The driver, a pale guy with short dark hair, had asked if I'd seen anything unusual on the ridge. I'd said no, not wanting to mention the silver flash. They stayed close, always just far enough ahead that I couldn't see their faces. Every turn they were there. The trail felt unnaturally quiet. No birds, no wind, just my footsteps and the soft crunch of their tires. When we reached the parking area, they pulled to the side. I walked past, feeling their eyes on me, and got into my car quickly. As I drove away, I checked the rearview mirror. The SUV was still parked. Then, right as I turned the last corner before the road back into town, it pulled out and went the opposite direction, back up the trail I had just come from. I haven't been back on that ridge since. He described a disc-shaped object hanging motionless over a clearing near an old quarry just outside town. The lights caught his attention first, soft white circles, rotating slowly, not blinking like typical aircraft lights. His account grew more intense as he described its movement, almost imperceptible at first, then accelerating in ways that defied logic. Shadows on the ground added to the strange scene. They seemed to reflect the surrounding trees, but in patterns that shifted impossibly fast. I listened carefully, scribbling notes and trying to hide my skepticism while he spoke. The entire encounter lasted barely 10 minutes. Then, without warning, the object vanished. No sound, no dramatic takeoff, just gone. When he returned to his car, the gravel at the clearing's edge looked undisturbed, as if nothing had happened. After hanging up, I remained at the microphone, reviewing the recording and my notes. An unsettling feeling of being watched crept over me, despite being alone in the empty station. I attributed it to the late hour and too many ghost stories swirling in my mind. The next morning started like any other. I arrived around 8, followed my usual routine. Coffee, checking messages, backing up the previous night's recordings. But something was different. Two men were waiting in the lobby. They wore identical black suits, conservative and unremarkable, except for their clear sense of not belonging. They asked for me directly, with a practiced, emotionless approach. "We need the recording from last night," one said, his voice flat and rehearsed. "For archiving," the other added. He was shorter, older, with glasses reflecting the fluorescent lights. His hands were neatly folded. They insisted on obtaining the original recording. I led them to the back office and pulled up the folder on my computer. Suddenly, my stomach dropped. The file was missing. I had backed everything up just the night before. I double-checked timestamps, searched the trash, even ran a comprehensive search for partial files. Nothing. "Strange," I muttered, a knot of unease forming. The taller man leaned in, watching intently. I closed the laptop, my chest tightening from the strange encounter. The men had been too calm, too precise. Not threatening, exactly, but unsettling. Their polite demeanor and methodical approach left me on edge. In just 7 minutes, they'd thanked me, left their cards, and walked out as if nothing unusual had happened. After they left, I tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe someone had hacked the server, or I'd misfiled the recording. I even asked the overnight engineer if he'd touched anything, but he swore he hadn't. That evening, I returned to the station, hoping to listen to a backup recording from the drive at home. My apartment felt unusually cold, and I found myself constantly glancing toward the window, half expecting to see someone in a black suit watching me. Nothing was there, of course. I plugged in the drive and started scrolling through files. Phone interviews, music clips, outtakes, but no trace of the original recording. I checked the cloud backup. Nothing. Sitting back in my chair, I tried to breathe evenly. Part of me wanted to believe it was a technical glitch, but another part knew those men weren't typical corporate auditors or local officials. Their appearance and intense interest in a single audio file seemed far beyond normal. Over the next few days, I struggled to return to normal. Every laptop open, every door knock, every tire hiss sent a wave of unease through me. When friends called, I'd give vague answers about technical issues. Subtle oddities began to accumulate. Neighbors mentioned a black sedan parked across the street that would mysteriously vanish. Lights flickered when I was alone in the kitchen. My phone would ring with no caller ID, answering only to static. Something was definitely wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. I'd been doing my usual radio station work, scheduling interviews and preparing music segments while handling listener complaints. But something kept nagging at me. Those two men in black who had visited me, their calm and deliberate presence. I started taking precautions. My office door stayed locked even during daylight hours, and I obsessively checked backups, hoping to find some trace of the missing file or the caller's voice. A week later, my personal phone rang with an eerie silence. I didn't answer. That night, a car idled briefly outside my apartment. When I peeked through the blinds, it was empty. I couldn't be sure if anyone had been there. I cautiously shared the story with a few colleagues, careful not to sound too strange. Most dismissed it as a prank or coincidence, but I knew something more was happening. Months went by. The station shuffled equipment around, and I altered my routine, trying to forget. Yet strange things persisted. Silent phone calls, slow-moving black sedans passing outside. I never saw those two men again, but their measured gaze haunted me, as if they were evaluating me beyond just requesting a file. Questions about the caller and the recording lingered. Was it real or an elaborate setup? The audio was gone, vanished without explanation. Some nights, lying awake, I think about that midnight call, the lights over the quarry, shadows moving unnaturally. I began accepting that some experiences defy explanation, and perhaps that's exactly how they're meant to be. It was mid-August, around midnight, when I drove to the state park's edge with my camera. Astrophotography had been a casual hobby for a couple of years. The Perseid meteor shower was set to peak, and I knew this spot offered almost zero light pollution. I parked at the dirt road's end, carried my tripod about 50 yards into an open clearing, and set up. The air was still. The night was silent except for steady crickets under a completely clear sky. My intervalometer clicked away, taking 30-second exposures that captured the darkness. Initial shots showed typical meteor streaks until something unusual caught my attention while reviewing the images. Near the top of one frame, a small round light glowed faintly. At first I dismissed it as lens flare, but the next frame told a different story. The light had moved slightly, not like a meteor's blur, but with a deliberate shift similar to a star's movement over hours, except this happened in just 30 seconds. Scrolling through the sequence revealed stranger details. The object didn't move in a straight line, but jumped erratically, pausing between movements. Its brightness fluctuated, almost pulsing from dim to bright. Most peculiar was its trajectory, moving opposite the meteor trails when everything else flowed uniformly across the sky. I hadn't seen anything with my naked eye during shooting. Only the camera captured this anomaly. My initial rationalization was a tumbling satellite, but nothing in my previous experience matched these movements. After another hour, the light vanished from the frames. Back home, I imported the photos to Lightroom and cropped the images. Zooming in revealed a flattened metallic sphere with a faint halo. The pulsing effect was distinct, a rhythmic dimming and brightening that defied typical camera artifacts. 2 days passed without sharing the images. On the third morning, a black sedan with heavily tinted windows appeared across the street. I assumed it was a visitor's car. An hour later, while checking mail, the driver emerged. A man in a black suit, white shirt, and black tie. His eyes locked onto me as he approached. Standing just feet away, he spoke in an unnervingly flat tone. "Are you willing to delete the last hour of exposures from August 12th? Thursday night in early spring was quiet. My parents were out late, Mom at her book club, Dad working the evening shift at the mill. I was alone in my room, music playing softly, while I fiddled with my ham radio. It was a second-hand setup I'd bought from Larry at the county flea market, which showed me the basics. Over the past year, I'd been teaching myself, usually picking up local chatter from truckers, hobbyists, and weather reports. That night was different. I landed on a frequency broadcasting something entirely unfamiliar. A voice spoke in a language I couldn't identify, not English, not Spanish. Short, clipped words fell in an almost rhythmic pattern, like someone reading from a coded document. No background noise, just a steady stream of strange syllables. I started writing down how the sounds struck my ear. After a pause, another voice emerged. Slower, deeper. It read a sequence of numbers, 43.819122.475, possibly coordinates, though I didn't investigate immediately. I just waited, unsure what would happen next. Days later, something weird happened. A stranger appeared at my door, demanding I delete something. He stood motionless, repeating the same sentence robotically. When I refused, he simply turned, walked back to his plateless sedan, and drove away. That night, I checked my doorbell camera. Strangely, the video froze for exactly 30 seconds while he stood before me. The audio continued, but the image remained fixed on a single frame. When it resumed, he was already halfway to his car. A couple days later, I returned to edit some photos. The last 15 shots in the sequence with the pulsing object were now corrupted. Black squares with file cannot be opened errors. They had been fine previously. I still have the earlier frames showing the object's initial appearance, but I never saw that car again. After school that day, I put the numbers into Google Maps. It pointed to a patch of woods about 20 m south of town near Devil's Hollow, a place I'd driven past with my dad before. Nothing special, just farmland and tree lines. The frequency had gone dead and I'd flipped through every channel I could reach, but I didn't hear anything like it again. So I wrote the numbers down and tucked them away. I didn't tell anyone. It wasn't like I thought I'd discovered something huge, just weird. The next afternoon, right after getting home from school, the knock came. 2 men stood on the porch, both in black suits with white shirts and black ties. No logos, no badges. One was tall and thin, with pale skin and a sharp jawline. The other was shorter, heavier, with dark hair combed straight back. They didn't smile. The tall one said my name like he was confirming it. "You have a radio set in your room?" I froze for a second. "Yeah," I said. His request was flat, like a given. "We'd like to see your radio logs." I asked who they were with. The shorter one reached into his coat pocket, and for a moment, I thought he'd show an ID. Instead, he pulled out a small black notebook and flipped it open. I couldn't see inside from the doorway. "You picked up a transmission yesterday. We need to verify your records." I told them I didn't think I had to give them anything without my parents home. The tall one looked at the other, then back at me. "Nothing to worry about," he said. "We just need to make sure it's logged correctly. It's for your safety." I remember those exact words. For your safety. They didn't fit the way he said them. I suggested taking their information and having my dad call them. They glanced at each other again. The shorter one closed his notebook. "We'll be back," he said. They turned and walked down the driveway toward a black sedan parked at the curb. No plates. I watched from the window as they got in. That night, I checked my notebook. The page with the strange words and numbers was gone. Not torn out. Gone like it had never been there. All other pages remained intact. My handwriting exactly where I'd left it. Just that one entry missing. The radio had been off for days, but 1 week later, while doing homework on my bed, it suddenly clicked on by itself. Static filled the air, followed by a deep voice speaking what sounded like numbers. 43.819122.475. I didn't write them down. That night, my dream transported me through a winter landscape of bare trees. Soft ground like wet sand cushioned my steps, and distant voices whispered, just beyond my sight. When I awoke, the radio was hissing static again, powered off, but still making noise. I unplugged it and shoved it into the closet. 2 nights later, returning home after dark, I spotted a familiar black sedan parked 2 houses down my street. As I passed, I glanced through the driver's side window. The tall man from before sat motionless, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. After parking in my driveway and pretending to check my phone, I looked up to find the car had vanished. Since then, I haven't touched the radio. Erin and I had escaped to the desert for a long weekend, camping a couple hours outside Moab. We've been seeking trips away from civilization, just us, a tent, and no cell service. After driving 30 minutes down a winding dirt road, we found a flat, open area about a quarter mile from a low ridge. The weather was perfect. Warm days, nights dropping to the low 50s, and skies brimming with stars. On our second night, we sat quietly by the fire after dinner. The moonless sky was pitch black with stars so bright they seemed almost touchable. A faint wind and occasional brush rustling were our only sounds. Suddenly, something caught my eye over the ridge. A spherical light, unlike anything I'd seen before. Larger than a car, it glowed a soft orange-white and hovered about 30 feet above the ground. Its movement was smooth and deliberate, not erratic, like a drone or linear like a plane, but weaving as if searching. We watched for a full minute before Aaron finally asked if I was seeing the same thing. We were sitting there, silent, after witnessing something bizarre. The object made no sound, no hum, no engine noise, nothing. Suddenly, it moved with impossible speed, shifting 20 or 30 feet to the side in an instant. My brain couldn't even process the motion. It hovered again, then shot straight up until it blended into the starry sky. We stayed quiet for a long time after it disappeared. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept waking up seeing faint glows around the tent. The next morning, we packed up and started driving back toward the highway on a narrow dirt road. The road was so tight that two vehicles could barely pass each other. When I spotted a black sedan blocking the path ahead, I slowed to a crawl. The car looked brand new, impossibly clean, given the dusty surroundings. Two men stood beside it, identically dressed in black suits, white shirts, and black ties. Their appearance was unsettling. Same rigid posture, hands clasped identically, facing the harsh sunlight without sunglasses. As we pulled up, one approached my window. His skin was pale, not sickly, but almost colorless. In a flat, emotionless voice, he demanded, "We'll need your cameras." I told him we hadn't taken any pictures. Technically true, since we brought my old camera but never used it. He didn't react, simply repeating, "We'll need your cameras." Aaron confirmed we had no photos. The man stared a moment longer, then stepped back. His companion hadn't moved or spoken at all. "You can go," he said. Both men walked back to their sedan in perfect synchronization, got inside silently, and pulled just enough to let us pass. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw the car was still there. Seconds later, when I looked again, the road behind us was empty. Just open desert stretching to the ridge. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive. I still can't shake how those men said, "We'll need your cameras," as if they already knew exactly what we'd seen. Last October, I was hiking along the coast in Bar Harbor. The morning was perfect, cool, sunny with that sharp pre-winter Christmas in the air. My camera was my companion, capturing the rugged coastline and the Bass Harbor Head lighthouse. I'm no professional photographer, just someone who enjoys playing with light and perspective. The tide had pulled back, revealing a rocky terrain that beckoned me closer to the lighthouse. Descending onto the rocks, I found myself almost alone. Just a few birdwatchers in the distance and some fishermen out on the water. I spent about an hour exploring, moving between tide pools and photographing the waves. While framing a shot of the lighthouse, something caught my eye, a fleeting glint high above the tree line. It appeared in my viewfinder for just a second before vanishing. I dismissed it as sun glare or a passing seagull. By mid-afternoon, I was back at the gravel parking lot, planning to head into town for dinner and review my photos. But, as I emerged from the trail, two men in black suits and vintage hats stood near my car. They looked like they'd stepped out of the 1950s. Initially, I thought they might be part of a historical reenactment or film crew. But when they turned toward me in perfect synchronization, something felt off. "Where did you have your negatives developed?" one asked with unsettling calm. Confused, I explained I was using a digital camera. They repeated the question, unchanged, their stillness unnerving. I showed them my camera, but they seemed more interested in whether I'd reviewed the day's shots. When I said no, they nodded in unison and stepped back, leaving me with a sense of unexplained tension. I turned around to put my stuff in the car, and when I looked back, maybe 5 seconds later they were gone. No vehicle, no sound, nothing. They had told me to take care driving home before walking down the gravel drive toward the main road. When I finally got back to my rental, I loaded the pictures onto my laptop. That's when I saw it. In one of the lighthouse shots, right between the tower and the tree line, there was a metallic object, perfectly round, like a ball bearing. The light was hitting it in a way that made it almost glow. It was too sharp to be a bird, and it didn't look like a drone. The strangest part, the next morning when I went to show a friend back home, the file wouldn't open. I still had all the other photos from that day, but that one shot, the one with the object, was just corrupted. It was a little after 9 on a Thursday night, and I was the only one left in the station. Night shifts at the weather service can be pretty lonely, especially when you're on radar duty. I've been tracking a line of thunderstorms moving in from the west. Nothing severe, just the kind of summer storms that roll in slow and light up the sky for a few hours. I had one monitor pulled up to the live radar sweep, another set to satellite imagery. Everything looked normal until something caught my eye, a return that didn't match the rest of the data. It was small, maybe the size of a compact car, if I had to guess, and it wasn't following the wind patterns. This thing was moving at over 200 knots at one point, then nearly stopped in place for about 3 seconds before darting off again. It zipped through the leading edge of the storm, slowed down, then cut sharply north like it had made a decision. My first thought was some kind of drone to be military, but the speed changes didn't fit. The oddest part, no transponder signal, Every aircraft I've ever tracked had at least some kind of identifier. I screen captured the sequence, partly out of habit, partly because I wanted to look at it later when I wasn't juggling radar scans. I even zoomed in on one frame where it passed just beneath the densest part of the cloud line. That's when I noticed the faint halo around it, like it was lit from within, but the light didn't scatter like lightning. I saved everything in our shared archive under a nondescript file name and made a note in the log for the next shift. 2 men in black suits were waiting in the lobby when I arrived the next morning before I'd even had coffee. They looked like they'd stepped out of an old photograph. No badges, no weather service IDs. The tall, thin one did all the talking, asking if I was the one monitoring Sector 3B the night before. Half asleep, I confirmed. His polite smile didn't reach his eyes as he said the data had been reclassified and they needed access to my workstation. Following protocol, I asked who they were. He repeated only that the data had been reclassified. The shorter man never looked directly at me, instead scanning the room like he was mentally cataloguing everything. Stunned, I logged in and stepped back while the tall man navigated straight to my saved folder. No searching, no hesitation. He deleted the files, emptied the recycle bin, then moved to the backup drive and did the same. Only after they left without a word did I realize they hadn't asked for my password. They already knew it. I assumed someone higher up had sent them and checked with my supervisor. But he was clueless. No visitors had been signed in, no review of radar logs scheduled. When I tried pulling the files from the server, I discovered something strange. Our system maintains 3 redundant backups in separate locations, making complete deletion complex. Yet all 3 file versions were gone. Not corrupted, not hidden, simply erased as if they'd never existed. That afternoon, I returned to the radar station and checked my log. The anomaly note had vanished while the rest remained untouched, with no signs of editing. Driving home that night through heavier rain than forecast, I spotted a black sedan parked down the street. No front plates, windows too dark to peer inside. I watched for my truck, but the car never moved. By morning, it had disappeared. A week later, during another overnight shift, I tried convincing myself it was all in my imagination. The old airfield was half park, half forgotten runway, tall grass, sagging chain link, and a couple of maintenance hangars that smelled like oil and dust. I go there for open sky and no neighbors complaining about prop noise. This evening, the thermals were good and the light sharp. I launched the drone just as the sun was dropping, aiming to catch the last light on the control tower for a time-lapse. Something felt off immediately. The swallows that usually skimmed over the grass at dusk were nowhere to be seen. The air was quiet in a hollow way, with no insects, like someone had muted the entire landscape. I shrugged it off and sent the drone up, watching the live feed on my tablet. I'd been flying long enough to trust the machine's movements. A little after golden hour, something crossed the horizon on the north side of the field. At first it looked like a lens flare, bright and round, but then it moved. It cut across the frame, low over the hangars, and slid into the gathering cloud bank. The drone tracked its impossible speed. A blink and a full stop right at the cloud base. No sound came through the tablet, no echo from the field. Then, as if reality had been fast-forwarded, it vanished inside the cloud too quickly for the eye to follow. I hit record out of reflex. I always capture everything. On playback, the object was a hard-edged disc, not a smear. It hit the cloud bank, and the pixels bloomed around it for a frame like heat haze, then disappeared. The timestamp showed a clean 1-second gap where the object should have been, with the cloud moving identically before and after. I replayed the segment until my neck cramped. Later that night, halfway through my watch, I caught another blip on the radar. Same size, same movement, same strange pauses. Before I could save it, the signal blinked out. Not faded, just gone mid-scan. 10 minutes later the desk phone rang. When I answered, silence greeted me. A faint electrical hum buzzed on the line, and then a flat voice said, "You won't find it again." The line went dead. I haven't spoken about this to anyone since. I checked the SD card footage on my laptop in the car, and something caught my eye during that 1 second. Wanting reassurance, I uploaded a copy to my external drive and tucked the original card into my pocket. I planned to share it with storm-chasing friends later, hoping someone would confirm I wasn't imagining things. Sleep eluded me that night. My mind kept replaying that blank white moment where the object entered the cloud. The next day passed normally, with me checking emails and going about my routine. Late afternoon, something unusual caught my attention. A sedan without plates sat idling at the street's end when I pulled into my driveway. Its windows were too dark to see through, and it lingered just a beat too long before rolling away. Typically, I'd dismiss such a scene. But this time, the car lingered in my thoughts. An unknown number pinged my phone that evening, hanging up in silence when I answered. My unease grew. 2 days later, just after lunch, an unexpected knock came at my door. Through the peephole, 2 men stood waiting. Their black suits were crisp, shoes polished to a shine that suggested they were accustomed to professional environments. They didn't look threatening, just precise men who had mastered the art of revealing nothing. Curiosity overcame caution, and I let them in. They introduced themselves softly, almost as if offering me a choice. One held out a blank card. I waved it away. The taller man's slight smile didn't reach his eyes when he asked, plainly as if requesting the time, about the SD card from my previous evening's flight. Something in his tone made my mouth go dry. When I confirmed I had the card, they explained they needed it for investigation purposes. Their request was unusual. Most people seeking data ask for copies or files. But these men wanted the physical card, and their manner carried an unspoken pressure. I initially refused, offering to provide copies instead. The taller man nodded, unsurprised, then repeated his request, this time mentioning chain of custody, a phrase I'd only heard in crime shows. His calm persistence was unnerving. I'd been talking with a friend in airport operations, and something about their phrasing unsettled me. The situation felt too detailed to be a simple prank. We stood in my narrow hallway, trading cautious observations. When I offered to copy the file on my laptop, the 2 men remained standing, almost rigid. The man with a slightly wrinkled sleeve kept his hands clasped, as if touching anything might disrupt the delicate moment. Digital copies can be altered, he stated flatly. We need the original. His gaze locked with mine, leaving no room for negotiation. His companion stared absently at the ceiling fan. I handed over the card, surprised by its unexpected weight. He received it with both hands, carefully examining the corner label before sliding it into a padded envelope. Their movements were clinical, calm, efficient, corporate. No threats, no small talk, just pure focus. Before departing, the tall one delivered a crisp directive. We appreciate your cooperation. Don't post anything until we contact you again. When I pressed about their affiliation, FAA, police, university, they offered no direct answer. Investigation was all he said. We'll be in touch. Their exit was as mysterious as their arrival. No car waited outside. No footsteps disturbed the yard. After the door closed, I thought I heard a vehicle's distant hum, though it could have been the refrigerator or the kettle starting in the kitchen. I called Mara, a local paper editor, hoping for clarity. She offered to check footage for anomalies and seemed unsurprised when I mentioned surrendering the card. People like this don't use the word investigation and leave polite envelopes, she remarked. They have forms. The next evening, local news ran a brief segment about pilots reporting a drone near the airfield. The story mentioned nothing about discs or missing frames, only quoting an airfield ops source claiming the issue was resolved. Watching the station footage showing the empty fence where I'd taken my original shot felt surreal. A week passed. No call, no email, no official badge arrived. I found myself repeatedly checking the envelope, its flap slightly unsealed, wondering. I walked through the fence at the old municipal airfield just after sunrise because it felt like the only quiet place left in town. The weeds had taken over the taxiways. The tower was half collapsed and the gusts off the river rolled across the tarmac in long, lazy waves. I'd been coming here for years with a camera, chasing the way light hits rust and concrete. That morning, the sky was a low, clean grey, and the air tasted like river. Something felt different this time. I set up my drone and launched it, watching it climb into the clouds. Later, when I reviewed the footage, things got strange. The card was sealed with tape, then opened, then taped again. The card was gone. That night, I found another car in my street. A different make, the same quiet waiting. I sat at my table until 2 a.m. with the kitchen light on and the tablet beside me. But I didn't fly anything. The drone hummed in its bag on the shelf, the battery cool. I plugged the external drive into the laptop and scrolled through footage folders, looking for the copy I had made right after the flight. The backup file was there, but when I opened it, the timeline leapt a few seconds. Where the object had entered the cloud was a black frame, and then 1 frame later, the cloud was in a slightly different place. The encoding showed no errors, nothing corrupted, just a clean jump, like a cut someone had made. I thought about posting the clip online. I thought about how small and explainable my life usually felt. Instead, I shut the laptop and walked to the window to see if the car had moved. It was gone. 2 weeks later, a man in a plain suit left a small, anonymous envelope on my porch. Inside was one single printout, a still from my footage, the frame before the object hit the cloud. They'd cropped it so tight the disc filled the page like a coin. Someone had printed it on nice paper, not my printer. On the back was, "Please exercise discretion." I taped the print to the inside of my storage cabinet, where I keep propellers and spare batteries. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what they are. I don't know whether handing the card over calmed something or started something. All I know is the birds haven't quite returned to the airfield the same way they used to. And when I stand on the berm at dusk, it feels stranger to look at the clouds. I still fly sometimes, but I always set the recorder to save to 2 cards and 1 drive, and I keep a copy physically separated just in case. I rolled under the gate, marked by faded orange tape and a weathered no trespassing sign that seemed untouched since the 70s. The airfield was a ghost of its former self, a cracked runway with grass sprouting through its seams, no signs of life or activity. My destination was the maintenance hangars lined up in the distant lot. The day had that peculiar light that makes old metal surfaces gleam and shift. About halfway down the 3rd taxiway, something caught my eye, an aircraft unlike any I'd seen before. It sat just beyond the hangars, looking almost placed, with parking lights seemingly left on. From where I stood, the plane was unremarkable, matte dark paint, smooth skin, no visible registration numbers. Its silhouette suggested a light twin, but the details were off. The wings were narrower, swept in a configuration I couldn't match to any known model. The tail surfaces were particularly unusual. What struck me most was the absolute silence. No engine ticks, no venting hisses, nothing. Normally, a recently landed aircraft would have activity around it, avionic fans spinning, tow vehicles moving. But here, only the distant river and highway sounds broke the stillness. As a photographer who explores abandoned places, my first impulse was to frame the shot. I stepped off the taxiway, moving carefully through the grass, adjusting my camera's viewfinder. A sudden explosion of starlings erupted from beneath my feet, then abruptly vanished. More jarring was the immediate, complete silence, as if someone had hit mute on all wildlife. 60 yards out, I noticed something odd about the concrete beneath the aircraft's tires. It looked slightly darker, like something had been spilled and hastily wiped away, leaving a faint ring of dust. The aircraft itself remained utterly, unnaturally silent. Even my camera's autofocus seemed louder than whatever kept this mysterious plane in place. The silence felt deliberate, as if the air itself was following some unspoken rule. The plane had been there for a while, its presence suggesting a longer stay than just a few minutes. My camera captured the scene, previewing thumbnails that revealed the aircraft's body, a surface so clean and matte it seemed almost unreal. As the battery icon blinked, I moved to capture a profile shot. Suddenly, I sensed I wasn't alone. 2 men emerged from behind Hangar C, their appearance meticulously uniform. Black suits, narrow ties, short-cropped hair, and shoes polished to an unnatural sheen. They stood about 10 paces away, their arrival so silent it was as if they'd materialized from thin air. One looked skyward, the other studied the aircraft, both moving with practiced, economical motion. "You're not supposed to be here," the taller one said, a polite euphemism for trespassing. I quickly assessed the situation. Landowner, law enforcement, or private security. No badges, no identification, just crisp suits, and a measured tone that was neither threatening nor welcoming. "I know," I responded, "just taking photos. I come here often." The shorter man's single glance swept my camera strap. "It landed," he stated, not asked. "Yeah, maybe," I replied, unsure. He cut me off. "It landed." "This area is under quarantine," he continued. The word seemed absurd. No hazardous material signs, no containment vehicles. Quarantine suggested danger or contamination, yet nothing indicated such a threat. The taller man's smile was the kind reserved for delivering unreasonable requests reasonably. "For everyone's safety, you'll leave the site. We need your cooperation." Surprisingly, they didn't demand my photographs or ask to review the camera's contents. Their approach felt deliberate, relying on implied force rather than direct confrontation. As I reached for my phone, their presence hung in the air, calm, controlled, and undeniably authoritative. The screen flickered to life, and something felt off. The usual 4G icon was replaced by a small dash, and the camera's battery meter twitched as if touched by an unseen hand. A shorter man repeated his command. "Out." I told them I wanted no trouble, and began walking back, boots crunching on broken glass. Careful not to run or reach for another shot, I kept my eyes on the aircraft while the men watched my every step until I crossed the wire fence and passed under the sagging gate. By the time I reached the small bridge over the drainage ditch, the suits had vanished. No car, no footprints, nothing to prove they'd been more than a figment of my imagination. I tried to call the station, but the dial tone was an eerie silence. Driving home, I kept my speed steady, watching the field in my mirrors. The plane remained, but from the road it seemed to shrink, almost retreating into the airfield. That afternoon, I dove into examining what I'd captured. I uploaded the card to my laptop, copied the raw files, and zoomed in on the frames. Rivets, faded paint strokes, and small smudges appeared as expected. The frame where I'd walked around the nose showed a reflective glint and a strip where pixels looked compressed, like a dropped frame. No sound beyond the mic's usual muffled wind. I called the county office to inquire about any restrictions on the old field. The land management woman paused, seemingly consulting an invisible map. "Nothing listed," she said. "No notices, no quarantine. The airfield's been default county property for years." It didn't mean much. Governments often leave strange gaps on maps. For the next 3 days, I couldn't shake the memory of those men and their peculiar behavior. They hadn't demanded my photos or equipment, simply telling me to leave. A crop duster pilot friend dropped by and we returned to the runway at dusk, driven by curiosity and the possibility of a new unknown registry. Logic pushed me past caution. A half-mile out, we parked in the scrub and watched. No plane in sight. The concrete bore an irregular, darker oval where something had rested. We approached, and my friend tapped the surface with his knuckles, like checking a car door. Empty. No trace remained, no wheel marks, no drag tracks through the grass, just a space that had recently held something substantial. Back at the truck, he asked if I'd filed a report. I said no, unsure who would even take such a statement. When he inquired about the suits requesting footage, I explained they hadn't. He gave me that look friends give when they sense a simple, foolish explanation lurking beneath the surface. "Make copies," he advised. "Keep them somewhere else. Use the cloud." I agreed, but an uneasy thought crept in. If my phone had lost signal when I tucked away the card, whatever caused that might return. That night, a white rectangle appeared under my windshield wiper. Neat printed text read, "Area under quarantine, do not return." I photographed it before discarding the paper. Yet when I tried viewing the image, the file showed as corrupted. I haven't returned since. Dreams still replay the moment the sky went silent as birds lifted. I recall the men in suits, how casually they spoke of quarantine, as if it were routine. An old drive hidden in a filing cabinet held my backup photos. Part preservation, part heady advice about online records potentially vanishing. This morning, I checked the drive. The folders remained, but the plane sequence was one frame shorter, as if time itself had inhaled and exhaled differently. Asked what I'd do differently, I'm uncertain. I'd like to believe I'd investigate further or contact authorities. But the men were polite, and the location's silence felt more imposing than any potential trespassing. For now, I convince myself I'm fortunate to have left without incident. Telling myself not to return is essentially the same thing. It was late July, that dry, oppressive heat. I was descending the ridge when the cornfield ceased being a cornfield. A long day of driving stretched ahead, a highway cutting through Indiana's endless fields. I'd been on the road since before dawn, my truck hauling a load westward. Hours of watching identical landscapes had become a blur. Rows of crops, distant tractors, clouds of dust kicked up by passing cars. Then something caught my eye. Maybe half a mile off the shoulder, a strange shape hovered just above the cornfield. Triangle-shaped and flat-bottomed, with small dim lights at its points. It hung about 40 or 50 feet up, low enough to make the corn tops bend slightly under its shadow. No sound disturbed the usual background of insects and road noise. Its movement was unlike any machine I'd seen. A slow, deliberate roll across the field, as if scanning or studying something. Then a slight tilt, a few yards of drift, and a sudden stop. I pulled into an old farm turnout and killed the engine, wanting to hear everything clearly. The truck settled. The radio faded. The air felt compressed, heavy. A flock of starlings that had been scattered across the field moments before had vanished completely. I scanned the tree line and sky, expecting some rational explanation, a crop duster maybe, or an aerial banner. Nothing. Just that triangular silhouette against bruised clouds. I grabbed my phone and started recording. Something told me this was important. The battery was full. The camera captured the distant shape, looking like countless other landscape videos I'd taken. Then something strange happened. The screen went fuzzy. not like poor cell reception, but as if reality itself had shifted. I could see the object clearly through the windshield, but the phone's view became distorted. One instant of complete blackness. When the image returned, the triangle had moved slightly to the left. The video file seemed normal, but that moment of movement didn't look like any technical glitch. I knew what I'd seen. I waited until the light faded and the object drifted up into the low clouds, a small dark shape swallowed by grey. Feeling slightly ridiculous but compelled to report something, I radioed my dispatcher. "Something odd at mile marker 52 over the Briggs farm," I said. The lane lights rattled past as I drove, checking my side mirror. Sometimes I thought I could see a crooked, hard-to-place outline on the horizon, but it might have just been memory playing tricks. My next stop was a small interstate truck plaza with a blue roof and a diner known for good pie. I wanted two things: to drive until I was out of whatever that was and call someone for answers, or get down in the field and search through the corn. The first was the habit of a man whose paycheck depends on staying in motion. The second was a kind of foolishness I kept myself from indulging, so I made myself drive. The highway was empty, and the cab was cool. Pulling into the lot, I parked in my usual row. That's when I saw them. Two men in black, standing together near the end of the convenience store by the propane tanks. They were positioned like bookends, wearing dark suits, narrow ties, and shiny shoes. The kind of unruffled outfit you see in movies when someone mysterious steps out of a cab. They were watching the lot, the traffic, and me. Their gaze was intense, like two lenses fixed on a point, without moving their heads. I got out of the truck slow and went to the restroom as if it were the most ordinary thing. When I returned, they were still there. A woman in a reflective vest filled her water jug at the pump, and they didn't even glance her way. The cashier kept looking at the door, then back to the register. They didn't enter the store. They didn't stand in line. They didn't buy coffee or cigarettes. They just stayed at that end of the lot, watching people watching me. It made me want to leave my coffee and donuts, to get back behind the wheel and roll off the lot. I had this ridiculous urge to back up and pull out, believing that staying would give them a chance to do something. Even to me, it sounded ridiculous. My reply was the kind of clipped, neutral response meant to make a man stop talking. Copy. Keep rolling. You don't get a lot of time to make decisions. I sat in the cab until the stars blurred. They stood there, not moving, their faces identical. Same jawline, same eyes, same expressionless mouth. I'd walked over casually, fingers under my shirt, stretching into the air. One of them shifted almost imperceptibly, just the smallest reach. A slight turn aligning his shoulder with mine. No cashier came outside. No security approached. Drivers continued their routine, completely unaware. I tried the polite driver's smile, that small human gesture meant to diffuse tension. Nothing. They didn't smile back. They didn't blink much, if you noticed. Just men in black at a rest stop, the kind of scene that sounds like a late-night conspiracy story usually laughed about over coffee. The dispatcher's voice echoed in my mind. Keep rolling. I had no real sense of how to process what was happening. Later that night, my friend Luis would call me brave when I showed him the video on my phone. I couldn't have shown it earlier if I'd scanned the footage first. The clip had an odd jump right where the object crossed the frame, like someone had spliced a different cloud segment. The audio track held a second of high, thin static that looked like a recorded squeal, then silence. Luis leaned back and said, "Keep your ears open," meaning, of course, stay alert while driving and don't do anything reckless. During those strange minutes, I bought a pie, setting it on the passenger seat, a driver's habit ensuring you don't hit the road hungry. When I returned, the two men were still standing there, unmoving like part of the landscape. The sun had dipped lower. I got in my truck, started the engine, and pulled out. They watched me leave. No waves, no approach, just silent observation. I told myself it was coincidence, just men in suits parked for official business or preferring that spot. About an hour down the road at another rest area, I saw a sedan parked under a distant light. No one nearby. The driver's door closed. The license plate clean. From my passing angle, something felt off. But what? I was on the roof because it was the only place in my block that still had darkness beyond the sodium street lamps. Marco Reyes, that's me. Not an astronomer, just someone who likes pointing expensive glass at empty sky bits and trying to make sense of small things moving up there. I'd set the telescope up between rusting HVAC units and a dying potted palm, tripod feet on gravel, red headlamp tucked into my jacket to preserve night vision. The night was cold, the kind that sharpens edges. Late October, clear with a thin crescent moon. While logging the Cassiopeia sweep, My planet tracking app pinged a satellite pass. I always check satellites. They move like they're on rails. This one didn't. At first, I saw 4 points of light evenly spaced, crawling across the sky as if someone had snapped a line of LEDs into place. They held formation perfectly, no drift, no jitter, just that quiet mechanical glide. Then they did something that made me sit back from the eyepiece, because it made no sense in any of the little rhythms I knew. The formation split in a way that defied explanation. Later that day, driving my route, I could have sworn I saw someone in a dark suit sitting perfectly still on the passenger side, staring forward. 2 men in black stood at the edge of the lot, doing nothing but watching. When the lot was full of drivers, coffee to go, diesel fumes, and the usual short errand noise, they remained motionless. I haven't told anyone about the craft or the men. I filed a short note in my log, saw unknown object over Briggs Farm. Photo saved. It reads small, like a man making a brush mark in a ledger, not a confession. At home that night, my daughter asked why I smelled like diesel and pie. She wanted to know about the orange sky. I gave the usual explanation: highway, heat, a long day. We ate, watched cartoons, and I put the phone away. I don't know who those men were or why they didn't buy anything. I don't know why one had a tie that didn't move in the breeze. I'm uncertain whether whatever was over the Briggs farm was watching or searching, or if I was the only one who noticed. All I know is that the pay is good for the miles, and the miles are my business. If it's anything else, it hasn't told me yet. The lights danced with an unnatural geometry, pushing and snapping with impossible precision. No arc, no curve, just sharp, instantaneous movements that defied physics. I watched, blinking hard, checking my scope and phone to confirm I wasn't hallucinating. Corners forming and reforming, more mathematical than mechanical. For 3 minutes, the display continued. A strange choreography of light that vanished and reappeared fractions of a degree away. Completely silent. Around me, the roof was mundane. Distant traffic, a lone dog bark, the faint sound of a plane. But these lights moved wrong, turned so sharp they would shred any known aircraft design. Pauses that weren't pauses, but abrupt quantum leaps. After recording the sequence, I tried to review the file. My phone choked. Corrupted, the screen announced. That polite electronic way of saying the moment was lost. I shrugged and went inside. It was late, and rooftops always seem to harbor the best ghosts. The next morning, I headed to my usual shift at the downtown public library. 3 years as the evening reference librarian, a job of lending answers and shushing teenagers. Sensible work, which made what happened next feel even more surreal. At 8:15, walking out the staff entrance, I noticed 2 men across the street. They stood out because the morning felt completely ordinary. 2 dark silhouettes in suits that looked nothing like Tuesday morning streetwear, solid black wool, unnaturally crisp. In those moments after seeing them, something felt fundamentally wrong. After my rooftop encounter, these figures seemed less like coincidence and more like continuation. 2 men stood perfectly still under a closed storefront awning, their narrow ties and immaculately clean shoes a stark contrast to the quiet street. Their gaze was fixed unwaveringly on the library entrance, not shifting, not talking, not even pretending to check their phones. Something about their absolute stillness made my stomach drop with a precise, slow feeling. They looked like movie extras waiting for a director's cue, frozen in an identical pose that seemed deliberate. I tried to rationalize their presence. Maybe they were waiting for someone, perhaps private security. People wait on sidewalks all the time, I told myself, attempting to quell my growing unease. I changed my route to the staff entrance, but as I passed the bakery's window, I caught them in my peripheral vision. They were still there, still watching intently. My focus blurred. When someone asked me about genealogy microfilm, I pointed mechanically, my mind drifting back to the roof video on my backup drive. The file opened, revealing a single white frame where the light seemed to fold inward, erased like a heartbeat's instant. By 11, I told my supervisor I wasn't feeling well. He considered me briefly, deciding the day would pass without incident. Returning to the staff entrance, I saw the men had moved closer. Now positioned by the newsstand's plane trees, their gaze still locked on the library door, they didn't follow or approach, just watched with an unsettling spectator-like silence as I rounded the corner towards home. The drive back felt tense. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting suited men to be trailing me like a cliché movie scene. The street remained empty save a delivery van, filled with ordinary sounds, trains, a bicycle, a distant lawnmower. I knew I should have called someone. Police, a friend, my manager, but the rational part of me resisted. How could I explain? 2 men are staring at my workplace. It sounded absurd. So I sat on my couch, the afternoon stretching wide and uncertain. Over the next 2 days, a series of small, unsettling events began to unfold around me. My apartment clock mysteriously lost 7 minutes before catching back up. The neighbor mentioned her baby monitor had picked up a burst of static at 2 a.m. Not a voice or melody, just a thin, ghostly sweep reminiscent of old radio tubes. My phone battery seemed to be draining unusually fast, and the weather app on my tablet kept shifting forecasts. These were subtle, plausible glitches, each one wearing the disguise of mere coincidence. The white frame from the video haunted me. I tried to find the moment again on my clipboard and retrieved the backup card from the glove box, but something was off. The recording would play normally until reaching the white frame, then suddenly jump forward a second, as if edited by an unseen hand. On Wednesday, I returned to work, initially feeling clear-headed, but as I rounded the newsstand, the same men in suits were there again, watching the door with an intensity that felt like they were cataloguing every movement. A mother with a stroller paused, looked at them, and hurried away with a changed demeanor. A bus driver and a shopkeeper exchanged a knowing glance before shrugging it off. The men continued their vigilant observation. When I left early at lunchtime, they watched me longer. Their faces were blank, like identical copies. No sunglasses, nothing to connect them to the city's fabric. I kept my head down, walking with a growing unease. An odd sensation persisted that they knew exactly which pocket held my telescope key, that the white frame from my video was etched in their memory like a precise schedule. I contemplated various escape routes, parking across town, staying at a friend's place, changing clothes to vanish for a night. But in the end, I walked home. Habit, after all, is a powerful tether. That night, I attempted normalcy. I cooked pasta. I washed dishes. I tried to pretend the sky was unchanged. The topaz street light filtered through the blinds looked familiar. I quietly placed a red headlamp in the drawer by the door just in case. As I closed my eyes, the white frame burned bright and jagged behind my eyelids. The night drive had started like any other. Route 47 stretched before us, slick from earlier rain, highway lamps casting long, smeary reflections. Maya dozed beside me, Eli munched crackers in the back, and the baby monitor hummed softly with our daughter's breathing. The radio murmured a low talk show, creating comfortable background noise. 2 hours from my sister's place, something changed. A soft white dot appeared to our right, hovering just above telephone pole height. At first, I thought it was a local drone hobbyist's craft, but it moved differently. Not like a plane or helicopter, no blinking red aircraft light. Just a steady, unnerving glow. When I slowed for a road curve, the light seemed to adjust its angle subtly. Then it did something strange. It matched our speed, maintaining a consistent 20 miles per hour to our right. I asked Maya if she saw it, but she barely opened her eyes. Eli, peering out, asked if it was a star, his tone seeking confirmation. As I accelerated past a slow tractor, the light tracked us with mechanical precision. It wasn't buffeted by wind or wavering. Instead, it moved as if invisibly tethered to our car, maintaining a constant distance and bearing. We pulled into Maple Grove gas station out of routine. Maya likes their bathrooms, and Eli wanted more crackers. I cut the engine, and something felt off. Later, fragments of uncertainty lingered. Those men on the lights on the roof. A missing frame that might be a glitch or something more. The city felt watched, like a new camera you can't unsee. I'd left work early 2 days running with suited men across the street, simply observing until I departed. The small convenience lot seemed ordinary. Just another family stop with our car's headlights on and pillows half sticking out of the back. Tom, the attendant who knows half the county by voice, made a casual joke about the recent rain and power outage, glancing between the men in black suits, the pumps, and us. 2 men had arrived in a black sedan, parking quietly 2 pumps down, without a wave or an open door. Their appearance was striking: black suits, black ties, pale shirts, completely devoid of logos or identification. One walked with hands folded in front, moving carefully to avoid fidgeting. The other scanned the area with a level gaze, checking the price board with measured movements. The air felt thick with an unnatural tension. Station lights made puddles glimmer on wet asphalt that smelled like fresh concrete. A strange light hovered beyond the pumps, an odd punctuation against the grey sky. I didn't understand why suited men would be here at this hour, thinking they must have missed a flight or were simply bored. Maya followed me inside to check the refrigerated section, as she always does, with Eli close behind. The men in the sedan watched us. Tom's glance suggested he was weighing whether our presence might complicate his night, but he said nothing about the strangers. By the time we returned to the car, one of the men had approached. His movement was precise, like a gesture practiced thousands of times to reveal nothing. His face was unremarkable, too neat, with a corporate neutrality that made him instantly forgettable. "You folks should take a different route home," he said. His tone was neither threatening nor concerned, as casual as a weather report. He looked at me and Maya as if we were a minor traffic scenario, not a family traveling late. When I said, "Excuse me," he simply repeated his instruction, "different route." I was tired and wanted to get on the road, with rational thoughts lining up, but something felt off. The gas station seemed off from the moment we arrived. A car was already there, its occupants watching us. The man approached, his smile practiced and thin like a salesman's pitch. "We advise it," he said. Glancing between the pumps and us, another figure lurked just behind him, a shadow barely visible. Maya was quick, buckling Eli into the booster seat while clutching the keys. "We're set on our way," she said softly, careful not to sound rude to what could be a helpful stranger. "Are you with the county?" she asked. The man spoke about working with interests that preferred discretion, warning us to avoid the lowland. Those words settled heavily in my mind. I knew that stretch of highway well, the road that dipped near the old mill, low and flat, where water pooled after heavy rain. We'd driven it countless times, returning from family visits. I liked how it meandered through the trees at night, though now I was thinking about hidden culverts and puddles. "Thanks for the heads up," I responded, trying to sound casual. We didn't know who these men were, but sometimes strangers offer helpful travel advice. He nodded slightly, returning to his sedan. The other man joined him. Their car pulled away silently, no signal, no hesitation, vanishing from the lot's edge like an erased scene. We took the road he suggested, cutting wide through the ridge instead of the lowland. A light seemed to follow us from the station, matching our speed precisely. But when we turned onto the back road, it hung back momentarily, and then disappeared as if it had never existed. Something about interests that prefer discretion kept spinning in my thoughts. The phrase felt like lawyer speak or something muttered by people wanting to remain unnamed. I imagined various scenarios: utility crews, DOT contractors, an out-of-uniform sheriff's deputy. I considered calling the station's non-emergency line, but decided against it. The sense of something official felt more significant than any potential answers. The drive home felt different that night. Darkness pressed against the ridge road, trees etching stark silhouettes against the sky. My children were quiet, Eli asleep between cracker crumbs and heater warmth, Maya's head nodding softly. I drove carefully, the rain-slicked asphalt demanding caution. No cars followed, no distant headlights broke the darkness. When we reached the driveway, I let the engine idle, finding something comforting in its steady sound. After calling my sister to thank her for dinner, I watched to the rearview mirror. No black car, no unexpected lights. Just an ordinary night settling around us. Lawn lights glowing softly. Baby monitor humming its familiar static. The man's advice lingered in my mind, tucked away in that mental space where unexplained things rest. Slightly unsettling, like a cryptic weather report. The next morning I checked the dash cam footage. Something I hadn't done in years, preferring memory to digital records. The camera captured our station arrival, but something was off. The section where the mysterious dot had been showed one clean frame, then suddenly reflected pump lights at the lot's edge. The clip seemed edited, timestamps jumping unnaturally. My phone's files behaved similarly. A photo of Eli eating crackers had station metadata, its preview freezing momentarily before continuing as if nothing happened. I considered calling someone official, thought about exploring the lowlands, searching for whatever the man had hinted at. But family changes everything. You choose the safest path. So I made coffee, drove Eli to school, called into work, doing what men my age do when the world seems predictably stable. The day unfolded normally. Emails, work, people changing travel plans, paperwork. During lunch, I walked past the station without a second thought. Just another place to grab gum or a quick sandwich. It hummed with the same light as always, unchanged and unremarkable. I'd been sitting on the deck, coffee in hand, peering through my telescope near Cassiopeia on a crisp, clear night. My old dog was acting strange, holding his breath, ears rigid, staring intensely past the maple and power lines. I've known him long enough to trust when something feels off. I'm Ben Morales, living on the town's edge where streetlights fade and the Milky Way becomes visible. I work at the library and enjoy stargazing with my Dobsonian telescope. That evening, the air was so cold it seemed to make glass contact with stars sharp and brilliant. Initially, the object appeared like a misplaced star drifting faster than any aircraft should. Then it did something inexplicable. It skipped. Not a smooth arc, but a literal hop that defied explanation. Earlier that day, orange construction cones marked a spot with a sign announcing bridge work. Inside the site, I'd asked the attendant about the sign. He'd shrugged, saying people always put up warnings to be careful. No one seemed to know about the men in suits who'd been around. I still have the video clip saved, returning to that brief, quiet moment in the footage, like probing an old bruise to test its sensitivity. I can't explain who those men were, what organization they represented, or whether their intentions were helpful or manipulative. I don't understand why that dot tracked our movements or anticipated our turns. Our choices that night, taking the ridge route, avoiding investigation, staying on our planned path, likely prevented us from getting stranded in a washed-out culvert or encountering someone who might have provided unsettling answers. We made it home. Eli drew a car with headlights and a star which now hangs on the refrigerator. On clear nights, I often gaze at the lowland, wondering about the unseen. Those people in neat suits with soft voices seem to keep secrets in the margins. The memory of the man at the gas pump lingers like a subtle warning, the kind that makes you take a longer route for no rational reason. The sky hiccuped, and a light popped. I've seen plenty of aerial movements before, meteors, rocket launches, but this was different. The jumps were sharp, precise, and repeated multiple times. No blazing trail, no streaking light. Instead, it moved like someone was animating a dot on a screen with clinical precision. I grabbed my phone and aligned the scope's red dot to run the tracking app. The app confirmed my observation, showing the point hopping erratically, a tiny blip that kept re-entering the feed with the same small disappearances. Recording video felt like the right thing to do, for proof, and to capture something my adrenaline-charged brain might later misremember. The camera hummed, the mount steady, while the object maintained its strange pattern. After roughly 8 minutes, it vanished in a way that defied explanation. Not a fade, not an acceleration, but as if someone had simply deleted a frame from reality. One moment, jumps. The next, an empty, ordinary patch of sky. The starfield looked subtly wrong on playback, with a soft white haze. The recording app flagged a frame drop, though my laptop insisted the file was intact. I emailed Claire from the astronomy club, knowing she'd appreciate the mystery. When she called back, I replayed the clip. "That's not a meteor," she said, her version of being unsettled. A skeptical laugh suggested intrigue more than dismissal. Strange occurrences began to accumulate. A text from an unknown number arrived, 000000, completely blank. Then the radio in my old backup car scratched out a single, thin sound like a stuck record before falling silent. Coincidence, I told myself. Old electronics, a glitchy cell tower. Claire told me not to overthink it during our second call. I agreed, though we both knew my tendency to seek patterns. 2 days later, things escalated. The cloud-uploaded video developed a peculiar glitch. One single frame that wouldn't display, where the object had popped and vanished. The stream froze to pure white for a microscopic moment. My backup SD card reported a bad sector when I attempted to make a local copy. The mystery was growing, one unexplained fragment at a time. The incident started when Claire tried to check a RAW file on her computer. The folder opened and then closed with no read permissions, an unexpected response from someone typically fluent in digital language. 2 days after a strange car had been parked at the end of my street, I found myself on high alert. That afternoon, I'd noticed a dark sedan with 2 men in suits watching my house. They were the kind of neat, anonymous figures you might see in a movie scene. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, pretending to admire the weather, the standard behavior when you're watching strangers. 20 minutes later, they left without incident. When I checked with neighbors, Mrs. Halpert simply shrugged, suggesting it might be a delivery. She'd lived across the street long enough to know when someone was fabricating a story. Then came the knock. Despite telling myself to be cautious, to call Claire or the police if anyone suspicious appeared, I found myself responding. The man at the door was small and clean-faced, wearing a dark suit that seemed out of place in our town. His hands were positioned carefully, almost deferentially. His shoes looked pristine, untouched by gravel. "Mr. Morales?" he asked, his voice steady with an unidentifiable accent. When he requested to enter, I refused, instead directing him to the porch where my dog could observe. The dog, typically a good judge of character, seemed unperturbed. He carried a thin business card, holding it out before pulling it back. "I represent parties that monitor certain aerial phenomena," he said, indicating he wouldn't take much time. His smile carried no warmth. Throughout the encounter, nothing felt quite right, from the computer's mysterious file closure to the strangers watching my house, to this unexpected visitor with his cryptic introduction. The man who approached me seemed uninterested in threats or official channels. "We work independently," he said, delivering the line like a routine weather update. His eyes, the color of old pennies, held a steady gaze. "Certain things are better left uncharted, Mr. Tears. Certain things are better left uncharted. Morales," he stated flatly. "No request for footage, no demand for my memory card, just a simple directive. You saw something. That's all anyone had to do. Make a note and move on." When I pressed for clarity, asking who he represented, he smiled without warmth. "You've done well to bring this to attention," he said. "Leave it at that." His demeanor was unsettling, not because of what he said, but how he said it. He wasn't invoking national security or scientific hazards, but speaking with an expectation of immediate compliance. He stayed just long enough to be polite, just short enough to be unnerving. Then he smoothed his jacket and repeated his earlier phrase about leaving things uncharted. His departure was precise, like a shadow sliding along a straight edge. After he left, I called Claire. Her voice grew quiet as I recounted the encounter. "He didn't ask for the data?" she whispered. "He didn't touch anything?" I confirmed his only instruction was to leave it. Her response was terse, weird. "Ben, log everything. Keep copies off-site. Don't go looking for this again if you can help it." The dog slept. The afternoon felt suspended, like the moment after something significant happens, but you can't quite define it. I filed my original footage in 2 separate locations, as if duplicating the files could somehow protect me from whatever had just visited. In the following nights, I found myself watching the sky differently, not searching for the object, but scanning for other watchers. At the next observatory meeting, conversation split between the Leonids and Montclair's latest observations, with an undercurrent of unspoken tension. The town felt different now, like a library with a single book someone kept rereading. I walked the dog toward the edge where lights thinned out, watching pockets of sky. My telescope stayed packed away, not used like before. A part of me knew something had changed. My name was in the group chat with a cryptic line about a white frame. People I trusted offered advice, then quickly changed the subject. I didn't believe in grand conspiracies or collect stories to prove something, but I kept the recordings, receipts, and notes of the visit locked away, with a backup at Claire's place in an off-site locker. Work continued normally. I shelved books, made coffee for patrons, tried to count things that made sense. The man in the suit never returned. The sedan never parked at the end of my street again. Yet the video still held that white frame when I scrubbed through it. Claire said such data would keep scientists awake for months. The man on my porch had suggested leaving some things uncharted. I didn't know why he warned me or who he represented. But I knew one thing. The sky had behaved in a way I couldn't understand, and for the first time I felt smaller than my own questions. It was late October when I found myself on the roof of the loading facility, the only place that didn't smell like diesel and cold plastic. We'd finished loading big orders, washing machines, fridges, and I told Tommy I was taking my break up top. He laughed, calling me Rooftop Marcus like he always did. The roof had a cheap folding chair, a loose cable to hook your foot under to prevent the wind from stealing your brake. From up there, the whole facility looked small. Sodium streetlights on Route 7 glowed. The neon of a 24-hour diner 2 blocks away flickered, and the dark mouth of the interstate turned headlights into a river of light. Night shifts can play tricks on your mind, but this was different. 2 hours into my 12-hour stretch, the usual industrial park quiet surrounded me. A thin, cold edge hung in the air, with a flat, matte grey sky overhead. I hadn't smoked in months, but my hands felt restless. That's when I saw the light. At first, it looked like a chopper near the freight yard, not unusual for this place. But something was off. No blinking beacon here. Instead, a single, steady blue-white point hung about 30 or 40 feet above the loading dock, so low you could almost touch it with a broom handle. Absolutely motionless, the light was strangely bright, without casting any real shadow, like a tiny moon taped to the air. Instinctively, I pulled out my phone and started filming. Capture it while you can, right? The video saved briefly. Then things got weird. The light didn't gradually descend or drift away. It darted 3 quick, sharp jerks like someone tapping a marble along a string. Then it vanished past the tree line, silent and without any temperature change. I sat frozen, hoping it might reappear. Gary from receiving interrupted my trance, climbing the roof's ladder with his standard check-in. He seemed skeptical, suggesting maybe it was a drone or billboard reflection. No interest in seeing my footage. Downstairs, old Pete in the security booth was muttering about a power issue at Dock 3. The forklift operators joked about hauntings, typical 3 a.m. banter after something unexplained. Later, trying to show Tommy the clip, I hit a wall. The thumbnail existed, but tapping it crashed the app. When I attempted to retrieve the file on the dock computer, the drive wouldn't even mount. Something had happened. Something I couldn't explain. At 2:47 a.m., the console hiccuped and the supervisor chalked it up to an old relay that circled back to paperwork. I filed it away as another one of those workplace gremlins and went for coffee. The security footage that morning revealed nothing unusual. Standing with the supervisor, I watched the big screen as the log jumped through the night's recordings. Dock 3 showed a clean 10-minute outage, and the roof camera's upload had an identical gap where the timestamp simply went blank. Later that evening, everything shifted. While sliding a shrink-wrapped fridge into position, the main line's lights flickered in a way that wasn't storm-related. It was that hollow movie light moment where everything feels slightly off. The radios in the dock stuttered momentarily, Tommy complained about losing his playlist, and the barcode scanner gave a quick hiss before returning to normal. Forklifts ran their diagnostic beeps, and we all continued working. Yet something lingered. A quiet thread ran through the room as if everyone had witnessed something unspoken, something they didn't want management to hear. All night, I kept thinking about the darting light, the dead file, the camera gap. During my half hour before midnight, I felt drawn back to the roof. I wanted to catch something that might not disappear when we looked away. The ladder was up again and the cold hit me like a sharp slap. Standing there, watching my breath curl, the facility below looked like an isolated island. A low metallic hum hung in the air, making the chair vibrate slightly whenever a semi passed on Route 7. I didn't see any light that night. I just sat, listened, and watched the chain-link fence. A stupid sense crept over me that by trying to capture something, I might want to be seen. Maybe it was just a maintenance drone, I told myself. Maybe my cheap phone had simply corrupted the file. I decided I was done with this rooftop investigation, the same way I'd told myself before, right up until the warehouse line rang at 3:10 a.m., breaking the night silence. Our single office telephone connects to a bank of lines, and when it sounds, everyone pays attention. Usually it's about a delivery manifest or procurement details, but not this time. The supervisor answered, wearing her headset and casually handling an invoice. Her expression changed, and she passed the handset to me. "Marcus, it's for you," she said. My hand trembled slightly as I took the call. The voice was controlled, almost practiced, smooth and measured. No roughness, no discernible accent. Just carefully chosen words. "Mr. Prevence's hair. Mr. Hale," he said, using my full name with a tone that brooked no interruption. His message was direct. Stay off the roof after dark. Not a request, but a statement delivered with an odd, almost gentle concern, like someone reminding you to bundle up on a cold day. No official introduction, no badge number, just a clear directive. I challenged him, asking who he was. A soft click, like a cigarette being lit, punctuated the silence. He repeated his warning with an unnerving patience that made my skin prickle. "Leave the roof to the professionals," he added almost as an afterthought. Then, almost casually, "and don't try to record again." The office around me continued its quiet night rhythm. Phones hummed. My supervisor had cleared her throat but kept her distance. I stared at the coffee-stained desk, hoping for some official explanation. "Is this the sheriff?" I asked, desperate for a rational context. "No," he replied simply. "Good night, Mr. Tenty." "Good night, Hale." The line went dead. The desk remained silent, the radio's faint beep, the only sound breaking the stillness. The clock on the wall read 3:14 a.m. as I set down the handset, scanning the security monitors with their grainy live feeds. Nothing seemed out of place, yet something felt off. I was certain the man who called had been standing between Dock 3 and the roof when I filmed, though I couldn't prove it. Pete just shrugged when I asked about the camera outage, saying his console had flashed but the log sorted itself. Tommy made a joke about roof patrol, one of those remarks that seemed to hint at something more. We laugh sometimes to avoid sitting with the strangeness of a moment. That night driving home, I kept my headlights on through the back roads, moving slightly slower than usual. The man hadn't yelled or threatened me like in some dramatic scene. He simply told me not to be there, and somehow that was enough. I tucked the phone into the glove box without questioning why. Maybe it was how he used my name, like someone who knew me completely. Maybe it was how the missing footage, camera gap and power blip had blended into one seamless, unsettling scene. Now I'm back on the floor. The roof is closed after midnight. A new policy, according to the supervisor's bulletin board note. She didn't explain who called or why, just stated it was to protect employees. Pete's console shows no other gaps. Tommy keeps quiet now. I still think about that small light, how it didn't cast shadows like a normal beam. My phone stays in my pocket. I haven't filmed from the roof since. In the break room, the skylights look like watching eyes. When I close the warehouse door and step into the cold, I always glance up at the roof before turning onto Route 7. I don't know what we saw that night, what prompted that call, and I'm not brave enough to find out. We had been driving back from my sister's place in Lebanon, Missouri. Late, near midnight, with roads emptying beyond the small towns. Aaron, my wife, dozed in the passenger seat while I kept the radio low, just enough to stay alert. Past Conway, the signal started disintegrating. At first, it was just static, something I assumed was typical for the area. But soon, voices began bleeding through. They weren't from another radio station. These were flat, robotic tones, like a distant intercom transmission. Individual words drifted in, fragmented and nonsensical. Continue. Observe. Vehicle. The words sounded distorted, as if playing at the wrong speed. I increased the volume, and Aaron stirred beside me. "What's that?" she mumbled drowsily. "Radio's acting weird," I responded casually, trying to sound unconcerned. Suddenly, complete silence. Then the voices returned louder now, overlapping in an unsettling chorus. Aaron sat upright. "This is creepy," she muttered, peering out the window as if searching for the source. My hand moved to switch off the radio, but then the headlights illuminated a scene ahead. A dark sedan sat angled on the shoulder, no hazard lights, no signs of mechanical trouble. Two men in black suits stood nearby, their posture unnervingly rigid. One raised his hand, palm outward, signaling us to stop. I slowed, but barely. Something felt off. No official markers, no other vehicles, no indication of an emergency. Aaron whispered urgently, "Don't stop." Their stance was unnatural, too symmetrical, too precise. Black fedoras pulled low, obscuring their faces. As we passed, they turned in perfect fluid synchronization, tracking our movement. The radio crackled again. A voice cut through clearly. "Do not continue." Then, more static. I maintained speed. Aaron twisted around, but the road's curve quickly obscured the scene. Before I could suggest she keep watching, movement caught my eye. Headlights appeared suddenly in the rearview mirror, blindingly white and impossibly close. "Is that them?" Aaron's voice was tense. "I don't know," I replied, pressing harder on the accelerator. We were driving late at night, and something felt off. The headlights behind us stayed exactly the same distance, neither getting closer nor falling back. No matter how I adjusted my speed, the radio remained dead, with just a faint static and occasional bursts of flat voices that sounded like a conversation we weren't meant to hear. Aaron tried to turn it off, but the knob wouldn't budge. I tried too, but nothing happened. The dial was completely unresponsive. We passed the Marshfield sign, still 10 miles away. I decided to wait until we reached more populated areas before taking any drastic action. Suddenly, the headlights behind us swerved slightly, as if the driver was trying to align perfectly in our lane. They weren't passing, just following us precisely. A couple miles later, Aaron announced, "They're gone." I checked the mirror. The road was empty. Looking out the back window confirmed it. No tail lights, no reflection. It was like the car had vanished into thin air. The radio went completely silent, as if someone had cut the power. When it came back, it was playing my original country station. We didn't talk much after that. Reaching Marshfield brought some comfort, with a few other cars on the road making us feel less isolated. We pulled into a gas station for a breather. As I shut off the car, the radio let out one last burst of static. Underneath, I distinctly heard a slow, monotone voice say, "Process." Aaron heard it too, nodding slowly in acknowledgement. The rest of the drive home was uneventful. But that stretch of road between Conway and Marshfield, we don't drive it anymore. On the third night, I was set up in the desert, perched on an old folding stool, with my camera on a tripod. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a pale river, while the ground still held the day's warmth, smelling of sun and dust. I was taking long exposures, 30 seconds to a minute, stacking frames to capture the galaxy's underside as it arced down into the landscape. 3 hours of two-lane road had brought me far from any town. Only a distant tower's red blink and the highway's eastern glow broke the darkness. Then I noticed a distortion, something strange in the air itself. The stars smeared sideways for a fraction of a second, reminiscent of heat shimmer I'd seen on summer car hoods. Midnight in the desert, and I was watching through live view, zooming toward the horizon. The ground shimmered like an oil slick on asphalt, pixels pulsing with an odd energy. Something angular emerged against the warped sky, too clean to be a cloud, hovering low and half hidden by distortion. This shape didn't move like any aircraft or bird, and it didn't cast light. I set my camera for a 3-minute exposure and remained motionless. The desert has a way of making you feel insignificant, your breath sinking with the shutter's click. When I checked the first image, a black slab occupied the lower third with a smear where the distortion had been. Scrolling through the raw file, I caught a glimpse of it again, just before it vanished completely. The outline had hard corners, like the back of a triangle wrapped in rippling air. I half-jokingly thought about finally capturing something worth printing. Out here, my phone had no signal, which was precisely the point. I couldn't stream or post anything, so I backed up the frames to my small SSD and sat with my thermos while the sky rotated overhead. An unusual silence hung in the air, as if the desert itself had stopped breathing. 2 ridges away, the Jeep's dome light flickered when the guy I'd seen earlier returned to his truck. For a moment, everything felt normal in that dark, uneventful way. I reminded myself to be careful about what I said out loud. When you're alone in such a vast space, careful takes on a different meaning. I looped my camera strap through my belt and compulsively checked the battery. The second exposure showed nothing, but that first file remained, a ridiculous smear with geometric lines like a child's kite drawing. Zooming in, I adjusted the raw sliders, trying to determine if it was lens flare. The edges shifted with each exposure, sometimes smooth, sometimes faceted, always vibrating with that strange jitter. Sleep was elusive. Around 3 a.m., while repacking a lens, a truck rumbled up behind my camp. Its headlights stopped on the shoulder, beams extinguished. I froze. Vehicles rarely appear here at this hour. The engine idled, then fell silent. Someone emerged from the cab, their steps crunching on gravel, a soft metallic sound accompanying their movement. A low, conversational voice called out, "Photographer." 2 men stepped into the circle of light from my camp lantern, their movements deliberate and measured. Their dark suits looked out of place, too crisp for desert wanderers, too carefully tailored to be casual. No badges, no official identification flashed. One was tall, his face folding into shadows like a complex map. The other was shorter, heavier, moving with the practiced calm of someone who handled delicate situations regularly. "Mr. Prods, Rivera?" the thinner man said without any introduction. I froze. I hadn't told anyone my name. The dirt road had been empty all day. My throat went dry. Something felt wrong. "National Security Review," he added, the words hanging between us like a command. His smile didn't reach his eyes. He made no move to show credentials, keeping his hands loose at his sides. I thought about all those conspiracy forums, those stories of mysterious government agents. Yet there was something undeniably official in his tone. A quiet authority that suggested conversations like this happened in rooms where voices never needed to be raised. "You want to see my pictures?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. The shorter man was already unfolding a slim tablet from a leather case, as if my response was anticipated. "We'd like to review your work," he said. For everyone's safety, the word hazard rolled off his tongue with practiced ease, suggesting he'd used it countless times before. He spoke like this was routine, a simple file transfer, some quiet technical review at the end of a long, isolated road. My instincts screamed no, but the vast emptiness of the desert suddenly felt suffocating. "Do you have ID?" I asked. "What agency?" "We're federal," the thin man replied. "Special review team. Nothing for the public to worry about. We just want to look at your images. We can take a copy with your permission." The leather case sat flat between us, the word permission hanging in the air like a weight. My mind raced through 100 small options as they stood before me. I could have demanded identification. asked to see their badges in the lantern's glow, called the non-emergency line to confirm their presence, or locked away the solid-state drive. Instead, I offered a glimpse of what I'd captured. They leaned in together, silent as churchgoers studying an artwork. The screen revealed a dark, faceted edge, wrapped in a shimmer. The thin man's eyebrows lifted almost imperceptibly. "Interesting," he said, mentioning something about a watchmaker and movement. When I finally asked about taking my contact information, the smaller man declined. "Not now." He pressed a slip of paper into my palm with a number to call the next morning. A central office line with no name, no extension, written in neat, anonymous script. They retreated to their truck, sat briefly under its dark hood, then drove slowly away. Dust settled like a lid had been placed over the landscape. Sleep eluded me. At first light, I packed up, leaving my half-full thermos behind and carefully wrapping the SSD in a plastic bag. An unsettling feeling lingered. I couldn't shake the expectation of encountering them again around the next bend. By midday, I dialed the number. Disconnected. Later that week, reviewing the files on my home monitor, I discovered something strange. Several frames had vanished. Not corrupted, simply absent. The RAW folder contained blanks where files should have been. The images I'd shown them remained, including the one with the distinctive outline, but neighboring frames had disappeared. I ran every check, determined to be methodical about understanding what had occurred. My SSD had held the copies I made that night, seemingly fine at first. But a day later, one copy wouldn't mount without an error. Files can be unpredictable, drives fail. Maybe it was just bad luck, or maybe something else. I kept multiple backups of the images, both printed and digital. That's what you do when you're not certain a file will survive. I considered posting a carefully cropped still or emailing it to my university friend who understood optics, but I didn't. At the coffee shop in the camera store, people were selectively interested. They didn't claim I'd made a mistake in showing the frame, nor could they explain the blank files. The thin man's interesting look kept replaying in my mind like a half-remembered headline. A week later, a local story emerged about a maintenance crew reporting strange lights near a cell tower in the next county. The accounts were vague, a flash, a shimmer, nothing concrete. I anonymously sent the link to my university friend, asking about refracted air and sensor artifacts. He noted some raw image edges, looked inconsistent with flare, and promised to investigate further. But he never did. His thesis defense consumed him, and then life simply moved on. The slip of paper sits in my wallet, nestled between a motel business card and a diner receipt. The number remains non-functional. A month later, I returned to the desert, setting up in approximately the same location. It felt like the only genuine way to answer my internal questions. Clear nights returned, the Milky Way hanging exactly as before. I watched the horizon, waiting. Nothing entered the frames like that previous occurrence. I continued photographing, long and short exposures, just to keep my hands busy. I preserved copies, one for myself, another in a fireproof bank box, and a third with my gallery friend. It quietly inquired about potential national security interest, but didn't press when I didn't engage. I never handed over the raw files, and I haven't heard from those men again. I'm uncertain whether that makes me lucky or naive. The image remains on my drive, with surrounding frames mysteriously vanished. And when I examine that pixel smear, questions linger. The road from my sister's place along County Route 9 stretched out before me, quiet and familiar. A dark shape caught my eye, moving slowly against the thinning blue of the tree line to my right. It drifted like a ragged cloud being dragged across the maple tops. No lights, no sound. At first, I thought it was just a tarp snagged on a branch. But then it slipped higher, and for a moment I glimpsed something else, a pale underside like fabric caught in lamplight. My name's Jenna, and I know this road well. I live just outside of Millerfield, and these late-night drives are routine for me. You learn to slow down when something feels off on a two-lane road. The truck that had been tailing me nudged closer, then backed off. Other cars seemed to vanish into the darkness. My headlights carved neat rectangles along the shoulder, and the thing above the trees kept drifting, almost as if it was tracking my path. I pulled into the lay-by by the old Berry farm, a spot with a bent sign and a crumbling stone wall. The car's radio was tuned to dead static, something I only noticed when the engine ticked quiet. Silence pressed in, broken only by my own breathing. The shape moved eastward, sliding along the wood's edge. A flock of starlings lifted from a telephone wire and settled again, unnervingly calm. No scattered panic, no alarm calls, and that oddity struck me more than the shape itself. Instinctively, I grabbed my phone. The camera app opened to a flat grey viewfinder. Autofocus hunted frantically, but nothing stabilized. The timestamp was correct, and a new blank thumbnail had appeared beside yesterday's pictures. A short, nervous laugh escaped me, the kind you make when something feels weirdly familiar. It sounded too loud in the quiet. Returning to the car, I noticed a sedan idling farther down the lane. No lights, its grille catching the last dusk like a pair of eyes. It was black, not just any black, but that smooth, deep factory black you rarely see in a place where most cars are older and beige. The windows were darker than legally allowed. The road was familiar. The doubts started creeping into my mind. A black sedan had been following me, keeping a steady, almost calculated distance. 2 car lengths behind, it moved with an eerie precision that felt deliberate rather than accidental. I tried convincing myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe the driver was heading to the same exit or was a late-night delivery worker. But then my phone began acting strange. The signal bars dropped from 3 to 0 in seconds, and the GPS transformed from a reassuring blue line to a spinning wheel of uncertainty. Taking the slower route through town, I hoped the car might peel off onto a side street or stop at the gas station. Instead, it remained behind me, patient and persistent like a shadow that had learned to track its target. At the single traffic light on Main, another car spun through the intersection, but the black sedan merely slowed, its presence unchanged. When the light turned green, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The dark mass was exactly where it had been. No signal, no movement. I attempted to shake it off, turning down Maple Avenue, but the sedan followed. I turned up the radio, seeking comfort in classical music, but even the string quartet felt disrupted. The music dropped out, with one channel fading like a ghostly whisper. Approaching Millersfield, the strip of newer houses and streetlights offered a semblance of normalcy. I turned toward the high school, its parking lot lamps creating a marbled reflection on the sign. The sedan remained, maintaining its precise distance. For a moment, I considered stopping on the shoulder to confront whatever was happening, but the thought of explaining this to others made me hesitate. Something inside me warned against drawing more attention to this strange pursuit. I walked up to the automatic doors of the Walgreens on Oak, my phone clutched in my fist. The night felt heavy, pressing down like a lid. After getting what I needed from the pharmacist, I emerged with a paper bag in hand. A sedan had pulled into the lot earlier, idling behind a delivery truck as if trying to remain unnoticed. 2 men in dark coats stood nearby, moving with an eerie synchronicity that seemed pulled from a movie scene. No backpacks, no obvious signs of threat, just a practiced, quiet precision. One man, maybe in his 40s, looked directly at me. Short hair, clean-shaven, wearing an expensive suit that didn't show a single crease. The other man's face was turned away, but his jawline revealed a certain hardness. When the first man met my gaze, he offered a small, polite nod. Not unfriendly, but not warm either. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice as casual as someone you might encounter in a grocery store checkout line. "Just checking in, nothing more." "I'm fine," I replied, "just heading home." He tilted his head slightly, like someone reading an invisible map. "Keep to the main roads tonight," he advised. "Avoid the ridge if you can." The instructions sounded routine, like an officer giving standard guidance, though no uniform backed his words. Oddly, I had been planning to take the ridge route home. It was shorter, prettier, a road that curved along the hollow, offering a complete valley view on clear nights. His advice seemed both helpful and strangely specific. We stood in the Walgreens sign's glow, 2 strangers who might have accidentally crossed paths during an ordinary errand. His eyes were the color of old coins, unremarkable, yet somehow memorable. In that moment, I realized I didn't know his name, and surprisingly, I didn't need to. The sedan remained, a silent backdrop to our brief encounter. Windows were closed. The air conditioning hummed. A trash truck somewhere down Oak pulled its compressor, and the sound filled the small distance between us like a reminder that life moved on. I said thanks and walked to my car with my bag. I drove off the lot, making a slow right toward the highway instead of the left that would have taken me up the ridge. A black car eased out behind me, following at a distance. As I got on Route 22, the sedan turned down a side street with such quiet resolution that I realized it had never been following me to press me, but just to watch the choice I made. Something about its disappearance bothered me. The relief I felt seemed strange. At home, the house felt too bright when I turned on the porch light. Eli, my neighbor's kid, sat on his porch with a bike, a dog, and a face full of late-night cereal breath. I said hello and kept my hand on the screen door like a talisman. Inside, I locked the deadbolt and sat on the couch, the television casting light that made the world look ordinary. Later, I called my sister and shared sparse details: a shape over the trees, a phone glitch, a black car following. She urged me to contact the police or sheriff, but I refused. They would demand a location, a license plate, proof. I had nothing except a blurry image and a polite man's advice to stick to main roads. Days passed. Newscasters said nothing. The farmer from the berry field down the lane visited with a crate of strawberries. When I described the shape and men in black, he laughed, a laugh that both humored me and warned me to be cautious. My phone worked again as if nothing had happened. The photo folder still held that blank thumbnail I hadn't deleted. Sometimes I'd open it, staring at the grey, trying to remember the edge of something in the trees. A small, steady feeling lingered under my skin, like a held breath. For a week, I kept to the main roads. The man's calm, practical voice echoed in my mind, and part of me wanted to obey his polite suggestion. It seemed such a small concession. Yet sometimes at night I'd pull onto the ridge anyway, parky at the overlook, more out of habit than bravery, to see the valley lights. I lock my doors a little earlier than I used to, keeping the porch light on until dawn. Sometimes I wonder if they were trying to warn me or to guide me, and I do not know which would be worse. The sky could be ordinary, but I remind myself to look up and tell myself to be ordinary. I'm Eddie Morales, a fisherman who works nights when the town is quiet and restaurants aren't buying. That late September night, the river was full-mouthed, and I was out on the skiff where the current put the fluke and stripers. The air smelled of salt and wet rope, with a low fog rolling in from the headlands. My ladder lights were on, the small thermos of coffee tucked under the bow, and the radio a soft hiss in the console. Then I saw the lights. First, maybe a half-mile out, I thought someone had left a headlamp on a dinghy, but they weren't typical. More lights popped up, soft like lures bouncing on the surface, then rising straight up, slow and steady. They reached 20, maybe 30 feet in the air, hovering in the fog without a sound. Pale blue and steady, not blinking like normal navigation lights. One broke away, drifting inland and cutting a diagonal beam through the mist like a pencil dragging across the sky. Whatever was happening, they left nothing but a memory and a suggestion. My phone stuttered when I tried to record, and a thin smear vanished before I could be sure. If the men were watching at all, they didn't drag anyone away or break any public laws. A shadow matched my pace until I made a different decision. Now all I have is a blank thumbnail in my phone and a polite instruction from two men in sharp coats. The rest of it, what I saw, who there was, stays in that grey place on the screen where a picture should be. The night was strange from the start. My skiff held steady, but something felt off, a tightness in my chest that comes from seeing something impossible. The fish finder went silent, not zero quiet, but a thin flat beep where sonar usually showed bars and dashes of bait and schools. I adjusted the gain and the screen blinked to nothing but my boat's shadow. The radio shifted from normal chatter to a metallic static that made the speaker sound encased in glass. Cormorants slid off the water like a black hand being pulled away, circling before vanishing. Then the lights appeared, pale and rising, lifting straight into the thickening fog until only the tide's low roar remained. I grabbed my phone to record, catching the first few frames of lights ascending. Suddenly, the battery died in an instant, the kind of moment that makes you laugh just to keep your mind straight. I started the engine and cut a slow circle through the spot where the lights had been, hoping to stir something up. My fishing line stayed slack, which felt wrong. As I eased back toward the dock, fog wrapped everything like soup. A pair of headlights crept up the boat ramp and pulled into the lot. Two men stood by the pilings, dark against the sodium lights. Their suits were so black they seemed to absorb light itself. One carried a raincoat despite no rain. The other wore shoes with a clean shine that suggested they'd never touched mud. They watched me without speaking as I brought the boat in. "Good night," I said. "The automatic greeting you offer at docks, even when your voice wants to say something more." They moved closer, already beside me before I realized it. Two guys stood close, just a short distance apart. Their smiles were the practiced kind, devoid of any real feeling. One asked about being out late, and they both turned to look at the water like we were part of some shared view. I explained I do night runs, and the tide was right. As I secured the cleat, my hands felt sluggish. The fog had this strange way of pulling sounds toward the harbor, making even public conversations feel intimate. The shorter man mentioned seeing lights, speaking with careful deliberation. He talked about marine life, choosing each word as if it carried weight. I apologize, but it seems like the text you wanted me to rewrite is missing. Could you please provide the full original text that you would like me to rewrite?